read? Whatever I said before to make sure the record was right. I guess we lost it. I don't know. But anyway, North Carolina General Statute 138A-15 mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. The chair also shall inquire as to whether there are any known conflicts of interest with any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. So do we have any conflicts today? I'm not aware of any. We have none. Okay, so a couple matters of business. Let's do the first one first. Commissioner Reardon is at he's here, but he's at a national agricultural meeting. We've got the FDA and other people in, so he was going to be here today. First thing, he was trying to be here for the first hour or two, but apparently I have not heard from him, so he won't be here. Commissioner Carter, I said it yesterday, I probably shouldn't say that, but he got sick yesterday and he wasn't feeling good last night. So he said he was probably 50-50 and did not call me to say wait on him today, so I'm going to proceed. Secretary Kelly is also going to be here today. If you see her sitting here, and she's not Commissioner Vice Chair Duggan today, but she was going to sit in with us today, but she is running late. So as it's 9:15, I'm going to get started. If we see Commissioner Reardon, Commissioner Carter, and when Commissioner Kelly comes in, we will drop them into the meeting as it goes. As I look around the table today and look at the agenda, we still have a quorum, so we can do our normal business as we see fit. Looking at the agenda, a couple things will shift, and one is to be added. Let's do the add first. Yesterday in the groundwater committee, we had a discussion about IMAX. That has to be approved by or evaluated by the full EMC. And they were kind of at a sticking point yesterday. So we agreed in committee to bring that to this body as an information item today. And so we will add that to the agenda at a normal place right after, as an information item, right after our last action item. So Lois will make that change and make sure we get that out, unless I hear any objections to that. Okay, so hearing none, we will do that. And then I was going to give the deference to the secretary to speak first, but she's not here, so we will slide that down until a time that's appropriate, probably after the action items, to let her do her briefing for us as an information item. Any other changes, modifications, adjustments to the agenda for today? Okay, hearing none, we will move forward. Vice Chair Dugan is in Germany, so we had minutes last week, but he was getting on a plane, and instead of, I think we were down to 20 pages, so instead of bringing 20 pages to y'all in draft form, I told Lois just wait until Chris got back, and we would review them one more time. I didn't see anything wrong with approving last meeting amendments in January to make sure they were right. So we'll wait for that for January on the minutes. Okay. I think that's preliminary matters for me. With no other comments, we'll move to action items. Okay. So if we're ready, action item 2423, approval to proceed to public notice and hearing with the proposed amendments to the Tar-Pamlico wastewater discharge requirements rule 15A NCAC 02B 0733. John Heisman. Good to have you back, John.
Good to be back. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Solomon, members of the commission. Again, I'm John Heisman. I work here at the non-point source planning branch at the Division of Water Resources. And I come before you today with an action item requesting your approval to proceed to public notice and hearing with the amendments to the Tar-Pam wastewater discharge requirements rule. Now, I have provided this presentation twice before to the Water Quality Committee. I know some of you are not members of that committee, so I want to just take a few minutes to start to provide a little bit of background about the Tar-Pamlico nutrient management strategy and why we're proposing these amendments. So in the Tar-Pam, we have a collection of nutrient management strategy rules for both point source and non-point source. But the Tar-Pam management strategy is a little bit different than our management strategies in the Neuse and Falls and other watersheds, and kind of has a little bit of a longer history. And so what I wanted to go through real quickly here is like how things started out. And The TARPAM management strategy goes all the way back to the early 90s, where we first started out with this agreement between the division and point sources to stay below nutrient caps to address the chlorophyll A impairment that's a result of nitrogen and phosphorus loading to the estuary. We have an estuary model, a TMDL, or load reduction goal of 30% reduction in nitrogen and no increase in phosphorus relative to a 1991 baseline. And under that agreement that was first formed in 1990, a wastewater compliance association was formed and nutrient caps for nitrogen and phosphorus were set and then eventually noted in their permits that they had to stay below. So that's how the management strategy first started, with that point source agreement. Fast forward a couple years, in 1997, the EMC adopted a non-association wastewater rule. And what this rule did is it addressed all new and expanding dischargers that were not association members, and basically set technology limits that the new and expanding dischargers had to meet, provide the opportunity for them to offset those new and expanding loads by paying into an Ag BMP cost share program, and just laid out that regulatory pathway for new and expanding non-association dischargers. Following up on that, in 2000 and 2001, the non-point source rule component of the TARPAM management strategy was adopted, where we now have requirements and rule for row crop agriculture, new development stormwater, and riparian buffer protection. So collectively, between the agreement, the non-association wastewater rule, and these non-point source rules, this makes up the TARPAM nutrient management strategy. So today, I'm here to talk about the agreement, moving the requirements from that agreement into the rule, and going out to public comment with those proposed revisions to the rule, excuse me. So a little bit more about that agreement. Again, it was started back in 1990. It was assigned an accord between the Association of Dischargers, the Environmental Management Commission. At the time, we were known as the Department of Environmental Management, Division of Soil and Water Conservation, and environmental groups like Environmental Defense and the Riverkeeper Association. The TARPAM Basin Association is a collection of 15 municipal wastewater discharge members. And again, the basic framework of that agreement was it established these end-of-pipe nitrogen and phosphorus caps for the association. And the real foundation is that, or the basically core of this agreement is as long as the association remains under those group caps, all of the individual members are deemed compliant with their individual allocations. And through the agreement, we provide pathways should the association ever exceed its cap, they could then fund Ag BMPs through the Ag Cost Share Program to offset those exceedances. That agreement was established in 1990. We renewed and revised it 5 years later in 1995, and then twice more in 10-year increments in 2005 and 2015. And the current agreement runs from 2015 through 2025. I do want to impress upon you, we've had this agreement in place now for almost 30 years, and there's been steady compliance with those nutrient caps, with the association remaining below their nitrogen and phosphorus caps and not needing to pay offsets to offset exceedances. And they're currently at 70% of their nitrogen cap and 68% of their phosphorus cap. And they've been holding steady there at those percentages for the past decade or so. This map shows the TARPAM River Basin and the location of the 15 wastewater dischargers that are members of the association. And as you can see, the location, they span all the way from the top of the basin down to the estuary. Of the 15 members, they're all municipal wastewater treatment plants. The biggest players are Rocky Mount and Greenville, with permitted flows of 21 MGD and 17.5 MG respectively. Of the remaining 15, 9 of them vary between like about 1 to 5 MGD, and then there's a 2 or 3 that just have below like 500,000 gallon per day permitted flow. These 15 members have remained consistent over the past 15, 20 years. There hasn't been much change in membership, and collectively, the 15 members represent 98.7% of the permitted flow in the basin. So we're really capturing the majority of the wastewater permitted flow in the basin. And they're currently, although that's the permitted flow, they're collectively on average at about half of their permitted flow. Their total permitted flow is 62 MGD, and they're at about half that right now. So hovering around that 30 to 32 MGD flow. So you might be asking yourself, all right, we've had this agreement in place for 30 years. Things are going well. Like, why are you moving the requirements from this agreement into the rule? And there's a couple of good reasons why we're doing that now. One is that agreement's coming up for renewal in 2025. But most importantly, in recent years, the divisions come under increased pressure to make sure that any requirements that we have in place for the regulated community, that those requirements that meet the definition of a rule should in fact be placed within a rule and not be in an agreement or some sort of policy document. So that's what we're doing here, moving things into the rule as appropriate. By putting these things into the rule, it establishes this enforceable foundation for the requirements that are also in the permit that point back to the rule. And this helps us avoid any future legal challenges to the requirements, gives us an opportunity to modernize that language and improve the clarity of the language. And I do want to point out that throughout this 2-year plus process of making these amendments to the rule, we worked closely in collaboration with the Tarpam Basin Association on those proposed revisions. I did include a letter of support from the association in the materials. And Adam Waters, I wanted to recognize the executive director of the association, is here today as well. In terms of what the current wastewater rule in the TARPAM does, I just want to cover the highlights there. And again, this is the rule that was adopted back in 1997 and then subsequently updated when we did our full rules readoption for all of our DWR rules back in 2020. This is that rule that currently just addresses new and expanding facilities, requires them to obtain existing allocation and offsets for those new and expanding loads, provides that regulatory pathway for trading allocation and nutrient offsets. And it also broadened the coverage when we readopted it to address new and expanding Tarpam Basin Association members effective when their agreement expired in May of 2025. The current rule, when it was readopted, we also updated the treatment standards for these new and expanding facilities, setting more defensible recent technical treatment levels for municipal wastewater dischargers at 3.5 milligrams per liter nitrogen and 0.5 phosphorus, and for industrial, a case-by-case basis using best available technology limits. Since the association members already have allocations under that rule, they're allowed to expand within their current nutrient allocations. And again, the rules set that updated offset process where we tie in to the existing nutrient offset rule, that 0.0703 rule, where an offset would be established by paying to a private provider, like a private mitigation bank or the Division of Mitigation Services, using those offset rates versus a outdated fixed BMP formula that we had in place in the past that was based off of a very dated ag BMP study that mainly looked at lagoon closures that were no longer relevant. Again, this current rule does not address the Tarpam Basin Association group compliance requirements. So what we're doing is moving those group compliance requirements from the agreement into the rule to make this one comprehensive wastewater rule for the Tarpam. With that, the proposed revisions that we're proposing to take out the public comment, I'll go through those now. Some of those include just some administrative elements, like where we're adding definitions of what the association is, defining an active allocation, a reserve allocation. Those definitions largely just come from their existing permits. We also do things like add the discharge allocation numbers themselves from the agreement. Those are those nitrogen phosphorus caps that are established of 891,000 pounds of nitrogen, 161,000 pounds of phosphorus. Those are the caps that they must remain below. We also in the rule propose adding all the individual NMP allocations for the association members that make up that group cap. And we also lay out, make it clear that, should things change in the future, should somebody expand or for some reason they accept additional flow and their allocation needs to change, that change can be reflected in their future updated permits. Again, the way the update works is also setting that any cap exceedances would be offset by purchasing nutrient offsets in accordance with the nutrient offset rule. In addition to moving those requirements into the rule, we've also added elements to the rule that provide flexibility on how they can meet those requirements. Those include the option to use existing offset credits that were earned by the association under the current agreement. Under the current agreement, over the past few decades, the association has banked credits by paying for various activities in the basin, and they've accumulated about 59,000 pounds of nitrogen credit. They would be allowed to use that credit per the agreement, now per the rule, be available to them for a one-time offset use of that 59,000 pounds. We also added an additional option to use reserve allocation to offset a new or expanding discharge. And that available reserve allocation is 59,000 pounds of nitrogen and 4,000 pounds of phosphorus. And where that reserve allocation comes in, I told you there's 15 members of the association, municipal wastewater discharge members. When the agreement first started, there was a lone industrial discharge that left the association and stopped discharging back in 2004. And at the time, their individual allocation was removed from the cap and set aside. And what we're proposing here, and there's been a lot of discussion over the years about what the fate of that allocation would be. And there's been times when new dischargers have proposed coming to the basin, and there's been discussions about using that allocation for that new discharger. We're making it available, and we recognize it was available in their permit for a new and expanding discharge to use that reserve allocation. Now, should a new and expanding discharge request use of that allocation, that reserve allocation, they would need to meet the technical treatment limits of 3.5 and 0.5 for municipal, or the best available technology for industrial. So along with that flexibility, we also added a provision just clarifying that there is an exemption, a minimum flow exemption, because there's a handful of very small wastewater treatment facilities in the basin that aren't part of the association, and they have not proposed for any expansions. It's very unlikely they're going to propose for expansions, but should they propose for an expansion, but that expansion still keeps them below 100,000 gallons of discharge a day, they would not be assigned individual allocations, just recognizing the economic feasibility of a small facility like that having to meet those requirements. So we added some flexibility to how they can meet the requirements. We also added some procedural steps to the rule that just address how things would be handled if you have a transfer from one facility to another facility that receives their flow, that the allocation from that transferring facility would be added to the receiving facility and added to their permit. And then there's just some procedural steps added to the rule to recognize that group compliance option for the association, recognizing that the association can meet its allocations collectively. Individual members are in compliance as long as the association is in compliance and under their caps. They can offset those exceedances by doing nutrient offsets. And should the association dissolve or a member leave the association, they would then be required to meet their individual NPDES permit requirements. Again, all of these proposed revisions were discussed in collaboration with the association. And I think the main takeaway here is that we are maintaining the framework of the current implementation of the Tarpan Basin Association agreement, and just codifying those requirements from the agreement in the rule and adding some flexibility. With the rulemaking process, in addition to the proposed rules, we have to develop a regulatory impact analysis and get that approved by OSPM, which we did. In that RIA, that regulatory impact analysis, we kind of laid out what I've discussed here today about why we're doing this and codifying the requirements in the rule, providing that enforceable foundation for the permit requirements, and the opportunity to modernize the language and add compliance options. As I've discussed, since we're just codifying existing requirements from the permits and the agreement into the rule, there's no new requirements and no new costs to the regulated community or state and local governments. And as such, there's no substantial economic impact to implementation of these rules. Where we are in terms of timeline, you can see here in this graphic that currently today at that November step presenting to you all, requesting approval to go out to public comment and notice. The plan is to notice the rules, hold a public hearing, have a 60-day public comment process between that January, February timeframe after the holidays, convene with the hearing officer, deliberate those comments, make any necessary changes, revisions to the rule, and then come back to you all in May of 2025 with the final rule for your approval for adoption. So with that, I just wanted to leave my action item request here today where we're requesting your approval to proceed to public notice and hearing with the proposed amendments to this tar pan wastewater rule. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Go to questions. Let me see if Adam Waters wants to come up and say a few words. I know this has been, points of this have been negotiated in a spirited way for a year now. And John does a good job of presenting that, but I want Adam to have the opportunity as the association executive to discuss that and where you're at in this whole thing. So, Adam?
Thank you for that opportunity, Chairman. Again, I am Adam Waters, Executive Director for the Tar Pan Basin Association. We recognize the desire and the need for the move from an agreement to a rule. We have been working with the division extensively over the past probably year and a half. And I think we have come to an agreement with the language that is in the proposed rule that best represents the association. And we are supporting it.
Okay. And you've looked at the regulatory impact analysis. I know there was still, it's a little bit of a paper game, but it's also real cost to somebody on the expansion if they have to activate these credits. So are you okay with the regulatory impact analysis too?
Yes, sir. And the way that the association looked at the impact analysis is implementing the rule as it stands, does not have a direct fiscal impact on members. However, when they do expand, of course, they will have to put in more extensive treatment units, and there is a physical impact there. But we looked at it that just solely implementing the rule did not have a direct impact immediately. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Chairman Gibson.
Yeah.
Gibson.
I just wanted to ask whether the regulatory impact analysis considered benefits in terms of preservation of water quality, fisheries, reduction of risks from harmful algal blooms.
I mean, looking at the benefits is part of the RA process. And since we were just, codifying those existing requirements that we put in place to protect those things, to achieve that chlorophyll A standard, I mean, we evaluate it and see what we're proposing here to continue that same level of protection and not decreasing anything from what we were currently requiring of them. And we're not calling for anything in additional to what was being called for before. So we do see this as equally protective of the current requirements, but that is part of the analysis, looking at the benefits.
It sounded to me like also it would reduce the risks that in the future there might be exceedances of nutrient discharges to the basin.
I mean,
so in that sense, there would be a benefit of decreasing risks in the future.
I mean, that's the goal, to make sure that we're offsetting any potential future increase, because obviously if there's a new discharger is proposed or an expansion that happens, this requires that expansion, that expanding load to be offset. So yes, we do see it as a benefit.
Any questions of staff or Mr. Waters, either one? Okay. Commissioner King, this came before the Water Quality Committee, and I know you've been active in this now for the past year or two. So any comments from you or a motion when you're ready?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, the committee has worked really hard and patient with John and the department. They've done a great job putting this together. More importantly, the collaboration with Adam and his association has stepped up and provided their expertise and their concerns moving forward. And they've collaborated well together. The committee was a little hesitant a little over a year ago because maybe the association and the department maybe needed to proceed a little more cautiously and more slowly and get it all together, and they did. And here we are today. They've done a great job. John has a great presentation. Adam and your staff and the association, just real appreciative. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I move and bring it before the committee to approve the DWR to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed amendment to 15A NCAC 02B .0233.
including the regulatory impact analysis.
Yes, sir, including the RA. Yes, sir.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Ellison has a second. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Deerhake,
I think he meant to say .0733.
for the record, .0733,
Dot.
and the regulatory impact analysis, correct, Commissioner King?
Yes, I forgot the dot and it didn't say the RA, but certainly want to include that.
Well, they
Thank-
give you the all right. You
thank
did all
you.
right.
Need my
Commissioner
glasses.
Ellison, you're good? Have a motion and a
Thank you, Mayor.
second? Any other discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Adam, for bringing this to a head.
Thank you.
Coordination wise, we do have a agreement that's set to expire in June of 2025. So we're going to go at breakneck speed. I think we can get a little bit of reprieve there, but we probably need to get the hearing officer scheduled. I had 3 in mind, but I did double check, and Commissioner Bumgarner, you are the Tar Pamlico representative. That's your river basin. So you're first on the list, so we'll tentatively pencil you in for that, for coordination. If you can't do it fast enough, we'll move on to somebody else that's in that part of the world, okay?
We're fast.
Okay, I know you do. I got full faith in you, so, thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, so now let's move on. Secretary Kelly is here, so I'm going to let her go next with her presentation. And I guess in her introduction, I do want to commend her. I think the commission saw her at every committee meeting yesterday. She was here almost all day with us, I believe. So I think that's the first time, not throwing off on any other secretaries, past or present, but we appreciate you being here with us yesterday. And when Commissioner Kelly called and said she wanted to attend the full meeting, could she? I obviously said you could today, and we talked about having her sit at the Horseshoe. So that's going to be a first too. So we're glad to have the secretary sit at the Horseshoe. And she can't vote like you're sitting in the assistant of the vice chair's position, but you can't vote for the vice chair today. But we're glad to have you up here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, and thanks for your patience in my arrival. Apparently, you cannot tangle with someone who's trying to turn left into the Bojangles biscuit lane. There's a little fender bender, it looked like. I guess the Bowberry biscuit was in hot demand during the rainstorm. So, but they look like they got it cleared out. No harm to anyone other than maybe some spilled coffee. But I'm glad to be here and really enjoyed all the discussion we had yesterday. It is a very different perspective to sit in the Horseshoe and look out and see everybody's faces as well. So a great opportunity here. I wanted to come and give you an update on Hurricane Helene because that's on everybody's top of mind. And we've already had some good discussions about what the staff's been doing and what the EMC is interested in and some, even ongoing hurdles that we might be able to address. So we're going to try and touch on all those. At any time, feel free to interrupt me and ask a question, provide a comment. I'm used to that. I've been a litigator before, so I'm used to interruptions from judges or from, sometimes your own witnesses who are correcting you. So feel free to do that as we go along. If you'll go advance to the next slide. This is a map that's been pulled together to show the most impacted areas. This extends out and there's even Mecklenburg County and Nash County, I think, that have some disaster declaration attached to it. But because of the way the storm moved and cycled, these red areas are the ones that had the most rainfall, the most water effects, scouring and debris down and wind. So because of that motion of the hurricane, that's where you see that difficulty. So you'll see us kind of centered, even within the center of that red cluster, on a lot of our activities where the storm hit the hardest. Next slide. Wanted to talk about our staff roles. We got a few pictures up here of some of our staff members out in the field during the immediate days, the actual day of the hurricane and the week after, doing hurricane response and life-saving activities. That's something you don't often think about with DEQ, but we had with our Marine Patrol out of Division of Marine Fisheries, just had them certified last year for swiftwater rescue. So they were able to deploy out and work through the Emergency Operations Center and rescue people and some of their pets as well to make sure they got to dry land, went through subdivisions and pulled folks out. In the Emergency Operations Center that was activated during this time, we were mainly focused on two emergency support functions. That's ESF 3 and ESF 10, which was new lingo for me. But 3 is a lot of the public infrastructure. So of course, all of our water infrastructure is that, and that continues to be ongoing as we are still in emergency support, moving to recovery support. And ESF 10, of course, is the oil and hazardous waste. And so a lot of our waste management is coming through those areas in emergency support, and will also continue in as we deal with debris management and recovery. At the Emergency Operations Center, of course, you work alongside your federal and state partners. And as soon as the storm passed and the waters began to recede, we started doing field assessments. Now, remember, 250 of our employees, most of those that report to the Asheville Regional Office or some to the Winston-Salem Regional Office, live in the impacted area. So they were dealing with the outages and their own homes and their own life disasters as they were responding in these field assessments. Next slide. Here's a map that was continually updated, but I think it's interesting just to see the devastation of this storm. These are the number of landslides that occurred in our western area. USGS continues to monitor that. There are still ongoing landslides, as you know, and as particularly if we get rain like today, there may be additional slides happening. So we are trying to map that, track that, and warn people. But it also meant that there was, besides just the water scouring and the wind impacts of this storm, you also had landslide debris coming down and blocking roads, pushing around buildings, cars, and everything else, and leaving behind a massive amount of silt everywhere. So there was no power in this area, no cell phone towers. I mean, even where you think you have resiliency with the Viper towers, which was our emergency responders network, that all went down during this storm, just unprecedented. A lot of the roads were blocked by trees, by the landslides, and also undercut so that they actually fell away from the mountains. Bridges collapsed. There was just a lot of times you didn't know if you were going to be able to get through until those assessments were done. Our staff during this time drove hours to find cell service just to relay their updates back to the Emergency Operations Center. I think a lot of people underestimate that when you don't have any communications at all, nobody knew whether this was localized. I heard a lot of people from Asheville think it was only Asheville, but then when they saw the reports, when the communications finally came back on, to realize the widespread devastation, that it was just beyond belief. We also had staff members that hiked miles to get to dams to see if they were in danger of breaching. That was one of our emerging concerns during the storm, was seeing the amount of water coming down and already onto a saturated landscape and impoundments that were already full. Was we had several that overtopped, and trying to monitor that and check in with people to see whether it had breached. I think Lake Lure was one of the ones that we were watching the entire time with some scouring on one side of it, but it held. So we were very lucky in that respect through this disaster. Next slide. These are some pictures of some of the repair right off their first days, but our recovery efforts are focused and prioritized on drinking water, wastewater, and debris. We provide technical support to all of our facilities and permittees, but also to local governments who are just trying to navigate government. We've also activated several emergency funding operations and used flexibility where we can in a lot of places to try and give what we call bridge loans, where we think expenses will be likely reimbursed by FEMA, but they need cash now to get things going and contracts out the door. And that has been very popular with our locals. I've said to local officials, DEQ will be here for the long haul. We will support you throughout this emergency and do everything we can. And in response, particularly around the funding, I've always heard a thank you. And in at least 5 instances this last week, I've heard, I love DEQ. So that's my goal, to get at least 5 more in the next week and 5 more after that, and keep hearing, I love DEQ. Next slide. On infrastructure, these are water systems. We had 750 drinking water systems, and the day after Helene, there were over 90 without power. there were 200 that we didn't even know the status of, couldn't get in touch with an operator, couldn't get in touch with anyone at the town. It just, the comms were completely down. So, it's just a huge unknown. A few days after that, we did get in touch with more systems, and we had 160 systems that were operational, but were on boil water advisories because of the inundation of the systems. In Asheville, you've heard a lot about Asheville in the news. It has a turbidity problem. It used to have the most pristine water across the state. And when I talked to the city of Asheville water people, they said they used to get teased at conferences because they never had any problems with their water treatment because they started with clean, clear water. And so they had to do very little in the treatment. So I think they've gotten a few little rubbings or kind of good-natured teasing about, oh, now you have turbidity. Now you see filtration and pre-filters and a lot of things. But if you followed along, they had more than just turbidity from all the sediment coming into the lake there at the North Fork Reservoir. They also had a major break of a 36-inch pipe. So that was like one piece that was never going to work until everything was activated to get it back in place. City of Asheville people worked nonstop. EPA was there, Corps of Engineers, everybody was pulling in. They got a pipe of that size in place, and I think they worked around the clock until they connected it around 1 in the morning. So water started flowing again, and then they could move on to treatment. But that was one of the things about this storm, when you think about your water systems, that was just unimaginable, and we're still tracing out as systems come back online, is where were the breaks in the system. So first you get the source water up, then you check the plant, you keep going through that, systems, then people at least had alternative water, bottled water and some other sources. And as we'll move on to the next one, I think that we heard the biggest relief after that of being able to have clean water to drink was being able to flush the toilets. So getting into wastewater and sanitation was another thing that you just don't think about in your daily life. You really take it for granted. But when a disaster comes, it is there. And I do want to give a shout out to NC Waterborne. I know Kenny Waldrop's here, and we have just had continual partnership with Waterborne and the local governments that are having these water systems and wastewater systems. This is a partnership of utilities from around the state who provide their technical expertise. They provide volunteers that come in and talk one-on-one with their colleagues to get the resources and the help they need to get things started again. So one, just workforce is a big piece. And then two, equipment. Where is equipment? Where can we borrow something? Where can we get things going? So I will say a big shout out to the NC Waterborne today.
Excellent.
All right, next slide. These are wastewater. So there are over 250 wastewater systems in the area. And after the storm, only 53 of those were normal. Of course, wastewater is a lot lower down, a lot closer to the rivers sometimes than water systems. So they had a much heavier impact. 18 were closed with significant damage, 30 with no power, and 70 were just unknown. And if you'll advance to the next slide. Here's some pictures of people doing work to get these places back up online. Today, the vast majority of wastewater systems are open. I think we only have 5 that are still closed, and those are the most stubborn ones. Some of those systems also have trouble with their collection lines. Next slide. I should have rearranged this one, but this was a little bit of the water infrastructure. Oh, nope. I did move that one. All right. This is a picture trying to capture a little bit of the debris. And it's just in a picture, you see it. We try to put some things in so you can get the scale of it, but this is just throughout the entire area, just along roadsides. It'll be a building high of just splintered wood and various debris. So the scope of debris removal is massive. It's estimated that over 10 million cubic yards of debris are needed to be removed. That's enough debris to fill the Empire State Building 8 times. So it is just going to be massive. It includes all types of debris, construction and demolition, vegetation, steel, metal, floating tanks. It's just incredible when you see it. Moving through debris, a lot of people ask how that will move. It looks like the first thing to do is clear the right of way so that functions can start moving, people can keep moving around. So we are going through the right of way. One of those other things is that the right of way legal access is clear because it is usually publicly owned in this state. Instead of having to go through each individual county or local government, a lot of them are state owned. So we have NCDOT working incredibly fast to move debris off their roads. And then there is a state contract in place with SDR that allowed local governments to immediately contract and get debris off their roads. So that is happening now. And then the Corps of Engineers is available to do some direct assistance, which means it's not FEMA reimbursed. They just do it for you directly. So that can sometimes be an easy button for the Corps of Engineers to do that. They are also working with debris at public facilities. So if it's blocking an intake to a water system, they will do that. Or if it poses an imminent threat to infrastructure or to lives. So what they call leaners and hangers. So just as you can imagine, a lot of these power poles have been cracked and are leaning over, then the Corps of Engineers can come in and fix that and take away the debris. And I know many saw the images of debris in Lake Lure. I wish I had one here. It was just from bank to bank covered in floating debris. The Corps of Engineers has taken on that mission and has a barge out there now with a crane, and they are plucking the debris out. It looks incredibly better even now, just a week after they've been mobilized. All right, next slide. That's right. DEQ has been asked to coordinate and facilitate many of the debris missions. So the Corps of Engineers likes to be tasked. They like to be executors. They don't like to be planners. They want to just be tasked with the mission. So FEMA will give them the overall mission, and then they'll work to see, does the state want to do it? If no, does the county want to do it? And kind of work through those partners to see if the lowest level of government wants to work the problem themselves, and they certainly can. We do have some state contracts, as I mentioned, out there that they can use as convenience contracts, or they can hire, through their own contracting processes with local companies. Some governments have done that. Most have used the state convenience contract if they move forward on their own. And now many are contemplating using some of the other areas that need debris removal with the Corps of Engineers. So DEQ is looking to coordinate that and make sure it fits in with where they want to get FEMA reimbursement on things, and particularly trying to clarify that difference between public assistance and private property. That's going to be a big issue because of the extent of the damage here. Our Division of Waste Management with Michael Scott approves the temporary disaster debris sites, which are proposed by the local officials. So that's been kind of a back and forth, hasn't it, Michael? Where should we go? What about this site? Is it suitable? And then what do the residents think about having a temporary debris site nearby? So we have worked through some of those, and we are continuing to do that, as well as monitoring landfill capacity. A lot of people just want to truck it to the landfill, but we really have to be careful about what we do there because it will fill up. So some of the Corps' mission is to actually take the debris off site, or as we'll talk about, even burn debris to try and reduce that amount that's going into landfill. And the Division of Air Quality is working with EPA on some relief on some of those things to try and get more capacity to do that, because without it, people will burn. They'll just do open burning, and it may not be in the safest or most environmentally friendly manner. So as a key partner in those efforts, we are proactively communicating with our local governments and with our federal partners. We continue to have meetings at both the EOC and having calls, as well as the Hickory Joint Force Operation Center, where a lot of the debris and recovery functions will be taken out of. So. Let's see. Okay, this is a little out of order, but these are my glamour shots of my disaster wear. DEQ has been out in the field, and I think you see pictures there of Marshall, which is just if you've been to Marshall, it is a very cute town, just beautiful, right on the banks of the river. every storefront that was there, including Zuma Coffee, which was a popular hotspot, has just been gutted. I mean, they've had to take it down to the studs. That's also the same in Burnsville, which is another riverside town. And then you see Spruce Pine here, where they have also had similar disaster and just had to like close their storefronts to just try and do a cleanup to keep the mold down, to just have it ready for the next phase. But a lot of that debris is coming out of there. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about flexibility and authority. This is the last slide, so get your questions ready. But DEQ requested regulatory changes in funding in both of our state disaster packages to the General Assembly, and we received a lot of it. What we wanted to do was help communities recover and exercise as much flexibility as we could without crossing any lines. So one of the things we've gotten was the authority for DEQ to require wastewater treatment plants to accept domestic septage. So think porta-johns. You know, when you don't have wastewater treatment plants, you've got to have porta-johns. Where do you put all that when all of your transport and everything else is disrupted? The authority to allow open burning of storm-related debris, I mentioned that earlier, including treated wood. And then we're also looking at conforming the state air curtain incinerator requirements with the federal rules to match up as closely as we can. So there's only one single process, not different rules for state and feds. The authority to allow mines to be used as temporary disaster debris sites when appropriate. That's a nice big open area contained with buffers around it. So we're hoping that will work out. And the authority to exercise regulatory discretion on certain waste management fees to avoid adding additional burden as communities recover from the storm. We've also done a lot with funding to try and free up as many of the pots of money we have to flexible. As I said, they can get reimbursed and repaid. So allowing local governments to use infrastructure funds for temporary measures to restore the drinking water and wastewater or provide mitigation that keeps the projects operable. Flexibility to move funds from drinking water and wastewater state reserves, a removal of a cap on emergency loans so that we can use the full amount of our funds to help, and the ability to waive fees on those emergency loans. So it really did end up being a cost-free loan, a bridge loan. So, but as it being a loan, it will be eligible for FEMA reimbursement instead of being a grant. So that was one of the things we want to keep as a best practice. So those are a few of the things we've done. I know there are more hurdles to do, including working with agriculture and looking at sites that need to be restored. I think that has been one of the things that hasn't been top of mind because we're trying to get that drinking water and wastewater on. But certainly as we move any kind of land moving and sediment, there's always issues for stormwater. In the mountains, of course, we have trout waters that we have to do, and how we prioritize debris removal, particularly from streamways, will be an ongoing issue and coordination point. But those are a few of the things that I see on the horizon. The impacts were catastrophic. Communities will need a significant amount of support. There's nothing we could do better, I think, than to focus on these communities and look at how we normally do business and where we can extend ourselves to help our communities even more. And with that, I'll take any questions, comments, or suggestions.
Questions from the commission? Mr. Gibson.
Yes, I have a question. So as the water systems are being put back online, is there any thought to, compiling lessons learned to think about maybe building in some extra resilience so these kinds of things are less likely in the future? That's one question. And a second question is, I'm the head of the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering at NC State, and we've been wanting to help out. So if there's anything we can do, please get in touch.
Excellent. Yeah. On the resilience, yes. So one, lessons learned, we are compiling those and trying to keep track of them. And I think what we're trying to do is do a debrief and kind of put that out as a hurricane response. It seems like we do this every hurricane, isn't it, Commissioner Smith? Fun for a while. But every natural disaster seems to be different, and there are different impacts, and certainly in the mountains we haven't seen the scope of this. Did you want to have some other comments on?
No, I was just going to say, I understand from some folks in Asheville that I guess the Corps of Engineers was considering installing an interim filter system, an additional filter system for the Asheville water system because of the sedimentation issues, and that they may actually keep that online as a backup in the future. So yes, I think there will be probably some infrastructure work that will carry forward, looking toward future problems.
I think one of the other interesting things we're compiling is the things that were resilient through the storm, you know, what survived and what didn't and what worked.
Right.
In Asheville, that dam had been improved 4 years ago, and it had resiliency measures in place there so that pieces of it would break away when the pressure got so great. And you can actually see that piece that had broken away as planned, as designed, and is downstream. Now, it was supposed to break up into smaller pieces. It's still like almost completely intact, but it did break through. And it, on the downside, that meant more flooding in Swannanoa. On the upside, the dam was not overtopped and didn't breach.
Mhm.
So, which would have been another catastrophe on top of catastrophe. So that was a great resiliency project that paid off and for an unprecedented storm. I think another one was the Hot Springs microgrid that was a solar array outside of Hot Springs, and it was able to come back online. It had minor damage, but was able to come back online and provide power to that town. So they had power, but they didn't have wastewater, and water was a minor repair, but they were able to get up quicker than others because of some of that resiliency measures that they had piloted. So we're looking at those and trying to see what can be done on doing work with FEMA funds. If towns are looking for public assistance, there is a program also that's called mitigation. So we get into how many times can we use the same word mitigation to mean different things, but where you have build it back to what was there, the replacement value. That's what FEMA public assistance will typically reimburse for. Mitigation allows you to build back to something more resilient. So you kind of have that thing. So they can make plans for that. And then there's usually a cost share piece to that part of it, or you can cover that cost, that increased cost, but still get the public assistance for the replacement value. So we are working with towns to try and understand that and provide assistance. And NC State would be very welcome as a
great.
technical assistance partner for those towns, because as you get smaller, Asheville probably is the largest one, but as you get down into these ones that have 1,200, 500, 200 people, residents in those towns, that you can imagine there's not a lot of capacity for planning and civil engineering.
Great.
Commissioner Yarborough.
You mentioned the part about having mines for debris approval. Would that be possible for landfills as well? Old landfills, maybe?
Old landfills, yeah.
If you look at, just in my home county there, there's landfills from the old Canton Mill, and it's, wasn't any kind of debris under it, so it's not something that would be an issue, but I just wondered if that's possible, because the debris sites are very possibly impossible, only because we had Fred on 21, so we already have debris sites, and so we're struggling to find those.
It's a good point, and I've made a note of it because many towns are asking us, like, where can we locate it? You know, the requirements just are difficult.
Okay. So we heard yesterday, I'll go back to Fred. We heard yesterday that from air quality, that air curtains from Fred are still, it's now being implemented. So I guess what lessons learned from Fred have you guys taken away? And the magnitude of this one is much greater than Fred. So how do you take those lessons learned? Have y'all talked about that very much, or, you know, years goes by if you're not careful, right?
Yeah, that's right. I don't think we're at 2-month mark yet. I think we're at 1.5 months. So 6 weeks in, we are compiling those things and looking back. We do have the Fred manual on the bookshelf that we've pulled off. I do think trying to expedite the planning and securing what we can during the first 6 months seems to be the sweet spot of urgency, still very top of mind for everyone. The Corps is still very activated in the region. So, and then I may just nod to Mike Abrazinskis if you have any other comments, but beyond that, no. Yeah.
Commissioner King, question?
I do on the waste management piece and stockpiling, in particular recyclables. So if you are containing everything within the state? I guess it'd be a question. And or do you have a contract, with the contract that you do have, would they have memorandum of understandings with other states or other areas that could bring in the recyclable piece, or have companies, entrepreneurs, businesses of any kind that do this, that we could move this into that area and not put it in North Carolina? So that's not negative or positive, just a question of, do we have to contain, there's more to come, much more to come as far as waste. And how are you doing that with your contractor? Do they have that understanding with?
Yep,
your
so,
department?
yeah, there's a couple like branches in there, so I don't think it's required that all the debris stay in North Carolina. It can be taken somewhere else. I think the transport cost is the main piece of that, where they'll be trying to balance that out. The Corps of Engineers has a national contractor called Ashbrit that's just been already on contract, so they could move, things around as they needed to sites that they're aware of. The Corps of Engineers does pick their own sites, so they kind of, when they have a debris mission, they make sure they have a spot, so they're doing that and working through that. And the way the basins drain in North Carolina, part of the mission could be to Tennessee. It's actually covered by the Tennessee district rather than the Wilmington district. So it's an interesting piece, but yes, and when you see the Corps activated, they have pulled district commanders in from New Orleans with a lot of flooding down there and expertise and dealing with debris, and from other areas from it. So I do think that's part of, using all our partners and having a national emergency. For the recycling piece, a lot of our recycling haulers were still available. So through our Division of Environmental Assistance, they were able to get in touch with them. And so we have been trying to divert as many things that are recyclable away from landfills and debris sites and into the recycling stream.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Ellison.
You
Commissioner,
mentioned
you're right.
on the horizon some of the lower priority but still important restoration of, I'm thinking particularly rivers. Every river I saw up there was 2 or 3 times as wide as it was before the storm. And I was wondering if there were funding streams identified for some of that restoration and repair. And if there would be, what the 401, 404 permitting process, are there emergency permits or emergency processes in place to expedite that work?
Great. Yeah, with your background in river restoration, you can see from the pictures it's going to be necessary. Some of that is happening just as a stabilization to roadways. Road beds is what we're seeing currently on that, but long-term stream restoration and planning would probably need new mapping and new, surveys of where the river courses are, and the analysis of whether it's better to leave it where it has moved to or try and push it back to where it was. Like right now, I know some of the infrastructure is in the middle of rivers. The manholes that used to be in the streets are now in the middle of a river. So your observation is spot on. They're wider than they ever were, and sometimes not even in the same channel. Funding, we have been asking for funding for restoration, and we do have a mechanism in agriculture through EQIP and some of those with soil and water conservation is one of the ones. And that's what we like to do, is try and identify a mechanism that already exists, so we don't have to create a new program and then realize where the gaps are. Anything that's been functioning is something we're trying to do. So we're partnering with agriculture to look at that stream restoration. And then our own floodplain resiliency blueprint, I always want to smash it up to just say floodprint, but is another mechanism that is relatively new, but does do mapping of basins. French Broad was up next to do that mapping and look at those flood risks and try and do that. And there is some money associated with that. It won't be near enough to cover it, but there is some start funds if we need to do some emergency. So we'll probably be doing a process like that to prioritize what projects need to happen first, what's needed for health and safety, for roads, for access, and down as we continue down that priority list. So I think I could see that coming before you all
Well, I
think about it.
I'm sure you've seen the locals putting rivers back where they were. A lot of that with no permits, which is fine. I mean, they had to do that to be able to drive through town.
Right.
But there are landowners and municipalities that are, it's becoming a higher priority for them. There are communities where, the road runs along the river, and on one side of the road, on the land side of the road, you have a line of houses, and on the other side of the road, you have houses that have little private bridges to get to their house. And the river's doubled in width, and now those bridges are cut off. People want those fixed. They're not a high priority from the county level or the emergency response, but they're becoming a higher priority. So from a permitting perspective, is that still just redneck engineering, just go do it and seek forgiveness later? Or will there be some coordination from DEQ and the Corps on those farther down on the horizon, as you called it, repairs?
Yes, I think you're right. The 401, 404 process is something we are trying to coordinate and give some guidance to. You're absolutely correct. You have captured it, that people are building back what they need to get across or using ATVs to cross the creeks. And what we are also concerned about on the horizon is winter and what will happen in snow or, ability to access that for emergency. So it is becoming more urgent and moving up that priority list. So we are trying to look at that. It is difficult to say, to just give a blanket approval. We've been asked that, could you give a blanket approval for, large scale bridges? And we do have the Bar Association and some engineering firms doing some pro bono work to try and help residents out and look at that. So it is happening, and if you're interested in working with that, I can put you in touch with the groups, and, we stay involved with them, but I think we're trying to figure that out. Just public infrastructure comes first, the massive parts, and then we've got to prioritize for residents who live there versus second homes, so it's kind of a tiered approach, but that is an ongoing issue.
Would you consider working with the Corps to issue guidance on after-the-fact permitting for response
Of
to that?
course, we'd always work with the Corps and, do what we could. I think getting guidance out there and looking at even things after the fact, sure.
So Secretary Kelly and I have discussed how we could, several of us have been through this before. We were in the cleanup in '05, and that seems like it was 20 years ago, but it was not this big, but it was close. It was some of the same issues, but anything we can do as an EMC, because as we know from that, at 3 months, 6 months, you do about what you want to do in some ways. But after 3 to 6 months, it starts changing and things get very restrictive. And so whatever we can do as an EMC, I know all of you want to do that. If there's a way we can clean up a rule or help the department with conflict of rules that we could expedite or restrict them to certain counties or watersheds or whatever, she knows we'll be glad to do that. So I think we've talked about that, and I hope that in the next few months, we'll be able to craft some help that we may as an EMC be able to give the department if they need some help with rules or whatnot. Of course, the General Assembly can override us all and help in a massive way, but we can help with our rules too. And however we can do that, we stand ready. So, Commissioner Deerhake, you had one, and then I'm going to take maybe one more after that, and then we'll take a break.
Thank you. I wanted to compliment the department on their dashboard.
Oh,
It was incredibly helpful. And it was something I turned to quickly when some of my friends were not getting as accurate information about progress as possible. They found it very helpful. It was amazing the level of detail that y'all were able to include and the real-time progress that was being shown in the early weeks about the water treatment and wastewater treatment systems and other places as well. I've had the opportunity over the last 2 or 3 years to do a little digging in history, and just coincidentally, I've learned about the 1916 flood, which was of equal intensity or proportional. Back then, 80 people died. The $2024 value of the damage in that time was only $3 million. Now we're talking billions, but there was comparable proportional damage done with that flood. And so I think it just goes to show now we're speaking in the billions, the impact of the development and the importance of proper development in the mountains to minimize the damage that could occur again if we have more storms, which we expect probably will happen. So the last thing, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Someone mentioned Canton earlier. How did the wastewater treatment plant at the paper mill hold up during the storm? Was it inundated?
Canton, I think it did come back online. I can't remember if it was fully inundated, and the town is using it. You know, that situation is legally complex. But
well-
functionally, it did come back on. It took a while to come back online, but since the tanks were so large, I believe they could collect the wastewater and hold it. So they were able to avoid a raw sewage discharge into the river there.
Oh,
So,
well, that's good to know. I've
yeah.
been worried about that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And a note to brag on the dashboard is we also had an employee who was able to use her skills to turn it into a mobile app. So if you had cell service, you could use that same dashboard to see it on the mobile, to see how many water systems were up and what was the status. So it was an amazing turnaround on that.
Commissioner Yarborough, last one, and we'll take a brief break.
Yeah, the region up there is a couple of things. One, we lost the Canton Mill, which was a pulp operation, 100 years, 200-mile radius. That was low-value timber and was used for a lot of different things. It was used in 2004 to take a lot of debris and be able to use that, make it into pulp. So this is a double whammy. People don't realize it, I don't think yet, but we've lost 150,000 acres in Pisgah alone to downed trees, catastrophic loss. That's not to count any of the private land. So we've got the double whammy of no place to put low value if you had it, and no market for it. And then we have the disadvantage now if we have all this wood products down. It's hard for us to look at that in retrospect, but we need another market, and that's what we've been looking for a while. I'm working on a project and I'd like to see if you'd have any support for it. There's a lot of different partners on this. This possibility of being able to have a biochar operation. We already have the facilities. We have the ability to do it. I've worked on projects for many years with biochar, but only in small little masses. If that may be something that we could fast track if you had an interest to be able to put a scale, to be able to remove a lot of this wood product and make it into a product that's actually useful. One thing is, as a good example with Agriculture Research Service out of Florence is interested in Lake Lure, use biochar to be able to take the toxins out of that even after it's clean. So even if there's nothing there, but to perception is reality to a lot of people. That's a tourist area where they want to swim in it. They're always going to have their concern. But biochar is a great water filtration thing. It's been used worldwide. So there may be a silver lining in some respects if we could all get together and think about what could we do with this wood products and give us a benefit to be able to look at it generationally too. Because this storm was a geological event, but it's a generational loss of wealth event. This is the most serious thing. It's obvious that the mountains were carved by hurricanes from the Gulf through eons. Rivers changed because of that. And that's exactly what's happened here. We're not going to go back. We can't restore what we had. But there's things that we could do if we were thinking about this. So I'd love to have some conversation about biochar. I think there's some opportunities there, and I know the facility we can make this happen, but it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of effort, and it's something to think about. Enough preaching about that.
Thank you, Commissioner Yarborough. That's good. Let's conclude that now, and we'll come back at 10:30. Commissioner, Secretary Kelly, I will give you anything else you want to add to now. You're going to sit with us for the rest of the morning. Is that right?
Right. No, looking forward to partner with you. I think on this particular one, we've never done anything like this before, so welcome all suggestions and input. It will be a struggle to make sure we stay within the lines, but we're going to try and be as flexible as we can. So where we have innovative ideas, happy to hear them. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, let's take a break, come back. I've got 10:22, let's say 10:30. Give everybody a chance to get a cup of coffee and a quick bio break. Here it comes. Man, it's like a 2-minute delay, isn't it? Okay, I'm gonna call us back to order. We've got 3 action items. I think most will be probably pretty straightforward, and 1 information item that may have a little bit of extended discussion, but maybe not. So let's go on to action item number 2, or 2424. And this is to proceed with the regulatory impact analysis. And I think Carrie, it's not Catherine, it's Carrie. Okay, go ahead. All yours.
Yeah, good morning. It's Carrie Pickett with the Rules Development Group with Division of Air Quality. We're going to be looking today at our revisions to our permit review timelines and definitions. This is pursuant to Session Law 2023-134. Just a brief list of acronyms. There's really nothing new introduced in this rulemaking, so these are all just kind of our typical ones we include. So the background to this was last October in 2023, there was some session law passed, and within it, there were changes to be implemented by the division regarding our permitting review processing timelines, specifically to do with permit modifications. So specific days were included, and a new term, administratively complete, was added. So here you see within the language of the session law, it was worded as 90 calendar days, and that was for minor modifications as the time period, and then a 270-day calendar day period for major modifications using the language of the session law. And that term was added as a definition into our statute, and this rulemaking will address and incorporate all of that. So historically, the way that our permitting processing went by is that we had what was called processing days. So now that there is this distinction of calendar days, there's a little bit of wording changes that is introduced in this rulemaking, and there's also some clarity for our applicants to kind of understand. Essentially, for modifications, they're no longer going to have the ability to pause the clock, so to say, for additional information. We are retaining that for our new permits and our renewal type permits. So this is just a little brief overview of our current practices, and this will be remain in effect for our new and renewal permit applications, just not for modification. But this was kind of how it was done before. It was a little bit of a 4-step process. And then there were 90 days, but it was more of like 90 processing days, and there were a little bit of like additional nuances. And this was for non-Title V permits. And then we have our Title V permit modifications. This was how we are currently doing it. The rulemaking will be changing away from this, but our new and renewals will still kind of follow this. And this is for minor Title V permits, significant 1-step permits. There is, of course, significant 2 steps, but we'll get into that a little later. We have some diagrams for it. So in our previous presentation, we did get some questions about, what do applicants need to have to hopefully avoid or, have the best applicant that they can put forward so that they can meet these timelines. So here, this slide really goes over all the things that an applicant can do ahead of time to have like the best materials included in their application as possible. Of course, follow the rules in 305, 505, and 507. Those are specific to what needs to be included. Any kind of calculations that the applicant knows needs to be included, please show your work. It's kind of like my nephew who's in algebra in high school, and he was bemoaning having to show his work to his teachers. Sometimes it really helps to see all those calculations. Don't just give us the final emissions impact. We need to see how you got to that number, because that helps us in the review process. So there are some things that are just outside of everyone's control. Things can happen, such as a change in legislature can happen. So we could have a new rule coming or a new need for a rule to come through. It could happen at the federal level, could happen at the state level. Other things could be happening outside of this. Technology could change. So those are some things that sometimes cause the review process to have a need for pauses and additional information requests. So this is just showing you that there is a two-step approach, not just a one-step for our significant Title V modifications. Of course, those are some of our most complex permit applications that we receive. Two-step is really at the request of the applicant themselves. And you're like, why would anyone want to take longer? Well, it helps sometimes to break up the steps. As we'll see in some of our other diagrams, is they can begin constructing a little sooner at the end of their first step. All right, so this is getting on to our new process. This is how it's going to be under, if this rule goes into effect, is we're going to be moving towards a 3 kind of phase approach in our permitting process. We are still retaining processing days as they are known, where pausing is still possible for that kind of first portion. The way the session law defines it is once that application is deemed complete, after that point is when these very definitive time periods begin. That's the 90 days or the 270 days. And they're going to count just straight through. And there's going to be a definite end point of where the applicant is going to know, is this permit issued, denied, or going to public comment. So here's some of our, visual diagrams. This is just to help kind of see how these processes are going to go for non-Title V permits, which are under our 300 rules. The processing, the first part of that is our days that can be paused. That's all in the gray blue. And notice the 10 days allotted for an acknowledgement letter is actually happening at the same time for those 45 days for looking at the applicant to see if it's complete. That's happening in parallel. And then once that application, as soon as it's deemed complete, that's when the 90 calendar days start. And at that point, there's no pausing. For Title V minor modifications, so these are kind of our sophisticated applicants, but they're doing a little change to qualify under here. There is some nuanced language, the way that our rules work, the way that the federal code works, is they're considered complete upon receipt. And so you'll notice here, we're not having that kind of first 60-day period of completeness because we think they're going to be complete upon receipt. And so they're just getting 90 calendar days. Still getting an acknowledgement letter. We're not getting rid of the acknowledgement part. Still need to keep that for all of them. And then we have our single step significant Title V permit modifications. And they're going to have 60 days for that first little period to see if an application is complete or not. They give us a little bit more time since these are more sophisticated applicants, and a lot of times modifications are a little bit more complex. Here's our two-step approach. While it looks like you might be doing 2 at the same time, it's actually you complete the whole first step, then you move on to the second step. And like I said, this is actually something that applicants themselves request. And, this is not imposed by the division at all. It's for the benefit of the applicant and gives them some business flexibility in their choice of which process permit review to go through. These are the specific rules. These 9 rules are the ones that we are recommending for amendment in this rule proposal. Our O2Q rules are our permitting rules. That's for air quality. So we're not touching any of our O2D rules. These are all under the O2Q section. And our 300 rules are specific to our construction and operation permits. We kind of call them our state permits. And our 500 section is our Title V, everything to do with Title V, which is all an EPA program that we, carry out. This slide just gets into the weeds of the specific rules, gives you kind of like what the rule's about, obviously, because there's a new definition being added so that we know when the time period starts with this, administratively complete application. So now our definition section is going to be pointing to the new definition in statute. We did get some guidance from OAH to make sure that we're following in with their new style guide to make sure that the rule language is kind of in lieu with everything. There were some questions while we were going through this pre-rulemaking stages on how to word this, what rules to target, which rules should be amended. And we try to be as concise as we can be in rulemaking, and we got it down to a list of 9 rules. Rule 312 is kind of one of our big rules that we refer to a lot in permitting, and that's because that's also to do with our non-Title V permits, which we get a lot of. So there were some significant changes to 312 because we're separating out the process. Previously, modifications, new permits, renewal for permits, all of that was under like one whole processing or one section of the rule, and all the process was the same. Now we're kind of splitting that apart, and these 3 slides relating to 312 are just explaining how they're getting separated out and to create that distinction to increase clarity and hopefully, makes it easy for applicants to read through and kind of see like which part am I supposed to do, while still retaining some of the flexibility for new and renewals that was there previously. Specifically paragraph A and then a new paragraph B, which mirrored some language but has some distinct so that we're really falling into what that session law says for just modifications. Rule 515, I have it highlighted here because there were some changes, very minimal, just for clarity purposes, to the rule language itself between the proposal before the AQC and the proposal today before the EMC. And these were in review of some of the aspects of the rules that have to do with like EPA requirements and things like that. And we were like, well, can we improve the clarity? Because some of our internal permitting staff had a chance to look at it after the AQC presentation. And there were some things that we were like, maybe there should be a little bit more separation of the paragraphs, a little bit more distinction done to make sure that it was clear where these new 90-day calendar days was going to fit in. And there is some ability under a Title V for EPA to make objections. So we want to make sure that that time period that's allotted to EPA for their objections isn't included in the 90 days. So that's what this language is all about. Similarly, in 525, this highlighted text was just a little bit of a cleanup change and clarification change with renumbering some of the paragraphs to make it just really distinct. And we're going to be referencing our 515 rule instead of including the 90 calendar days within the 525. Since 515 exists, let's keep it succinct, let's keep it in all in one rule. The 270 calendar days are going to be included in 525, and that's where that's going to be housed. This is our main rule for folks that are looking for a Title V permit. It's a good idea to start at 525, and then it points you to all the other rules you might need to look at depending on what permit you plan on applying for. So we do have an associated regulatory impact analysis with this rulemaking. There's not much of a specific number value that's going to be impacted from this that we could calculate directly, because a lot of this will come down to business choices that applicants will get to have. But for sure, one of the things will be a certain date. Once you have a complete application and it's determined complete, there's going to be a definitive date now that both the applicant and the state will know a decision will be made by. So that's one of the things that this timeline introduces. That will, of course, entail a little bit of a change in the flexibility that we were previously able to allow for certain applicants. But that's the benefit and the con. Getting on to the next page, because the flexibilities may be reduced, we do anticipate the potential for applicants to possibly spend a little bit more time on the front end before they send in the applications. And there's a potential that we may have increased withdrawals or that applicants may hire potentially more expert folks or consultants to help prepare these permits so that they can hopefully avoid a withdrawal and get through the process within a timely fashion. And of course, so the new date on here, October 24th, 2024, for our approval date from OSBM for this regulatory impact analysis reflects the change in the changes that we made to the rules themselves that were highlighted on the previous slides. There was nothing with the financial calculations that was changed at all. So this slide is pretty important. It's got a lot of numbers on it. I'm going to walk us through it because this slide is in response to some questions that we had during the AQC meeting. First off, we looked at a period of 5 years from 2019 to 2023, and we looked at a whole set of permit modification applications that we have received within to the DAQ. And we did this analysis pulling data from our I-Beam system, which collects and houses all of the record keeping and like kind of keeps all the permit engineers on track of where they are in their steps for the processing of permits. We had a total of 852 applications that we looked at for this. And you will see we are including our renewal / modifications under the new processing plan that will go moving forward following this rulemaking. Probably not going to be able to combine rulemaking like that because the timelines won't mesh. We try to do that as a benefit to stakeholders, and you can see some stakeholders did take advantage of that flexibility, but you know, it's just not something that's going to be possible under the new kind of stricter timelines. So walking through this numbers, you'll see the total numbers of the different applicants for the different applications. You see we got a lot of non-Title V state applications. There were, I think that's 387. Oh gosh, I don't have my readers on.
We got it in advance. I think
You got it in advance, so you got to see.
We've seen this.
Yeah, and so, okay, I'll get through a little faster then. So you can see that there's quite a few applications that just have 0 information requests and they just go through the normal process. Then with just 1 information request, if you combine those two, you're already at 84% of all of our applicants. So that's a, you know, vast majority are getting through with just 1 information request. And you can see here, we included the average days for how long that 1 information request is. And it's a, you know, it's within the current timelines that we are have, but it's also would be possible under even these newly introduced timelines. Then we get into 2 information requests. That's a few more applicants. And then of course, the 3 or more information requests, those are usually very specific situations for those applicants, things that are going on. And maybe they make a business decision that they want to put their current review on pause. They might want to prioritize another permit they might have going on through the system. So a lot of those have unique situations, and I don't suspect the facilities would take quite that long or maybe need that many, you know, knowing under the new system and knowing the more stricter timeframes. But those would be the ones in that last final column most impacted by this rulemaking, either to make a different decision or, you know, quicker with their information returned back to the state. This is where we are on the rulemaking. We're here today in November. We're hoping to make it and see you guys back in March of 2025. And that'll keep us moving on to make the deadline, which there is because this was introduced in session law, the session law has us wanting to implement this and have it a part of our permitting process by July 1st of 2025, which is why we have been working really hard on getting this before the commission and explaining it. We had a concept earlier in the year, and then we introduced in September to the AQC this proposed rulemaking package. So the only thing that's going to be a little different at the end of all of these different rules that are getting amended, they're going to have a little bit of a different history note because there is some dependency on the EPA approval. It's a 60-day window. after our RRC, puts it out into the NCAC period. So there's just a little bit of a change. And we did work with OAH to get some recommendation on this language. So today we're recommending that the EMC authorize this rulemaking for public comment period and a hearing. We propose these rule amendments for 15A NCAC 02Q, Rules 303, 304, 305, 312, 503, 505, 507, 515, 525, and the accompanying regulatory impact analysis, and for the chair to appoint a member of the EMC to serve as a hearing officer.
Yeah, and I don't think that last part is part of the recommendation, but I will do that.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
We can point to this, whoever makes the motion. Reminder to everybody, I probably should have said this off the bat. This is required by the General Assembly. It's got to be done on a certain timeline, so it's going to be done even today without the committee chair and vice chair here. We're going to move this through. And despite the yellow highlights of things being added since the committee meeting, I've not talked to the chair and vice chair. They look harmless enough, so we're going to keep pushing this out today in a way that we need to. So at this time, I will take a motion to approve, if I can get one. Motion for Commissioner Bailey to approve.
Yes, I so move to approve, and I just wanted to say I'm in the Air Quality Committee, and the chart that you put together is, at least from my point of view, was exactly what we asked for, and it really helps us to understand how this rule will work, and that the applications are already being processed pretty efficiently. So thank you for that.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Tweedy, seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Very good. Motion carries. Thank you, Carrie. All right. Next one is a final report coming back for hearing officers, a report back. So we will adopt this. And I guess Commissioner Gibson, I'd like to be the one doing the insignificant research, which is this one's titled. I thought it said significant research, but you're in the academic world. Do you have much insignificant research at NC State? So this one is titled Title V Insignificant Research and Development Activities. So hearing officer's report is back. Who was hearing officer for this? Kevin, were you? Kim was, so we don't have the hearing officer here. So give us a report and we'll try to keep this moving too.
Hi, I'm Ashley Hoskin with the DAQ. This presentation is on the adoption of 15A NCAC 02Q 0529, Title V Insignificant Research and Development Activities Exemption. So here are some acronyms and abbreviations. So some of the background, the initiation of this rule was the requirement under Section 1211D of Session Law 2023-134 for the EMC to create an exemption from Title V permitting for research and development activities to clarify flexibility. So the current practice of reviewing R&D activities is performed under existing provisions of Rule 02Q 05038, which closely aligns with Division's understanding of the EPA's position of the white paper, and adding this rule is not expected to change any of the permitting practices or how R&D activities are treated. So this proposed rule continues to align the procedures for reviewing R&D activities with existing federal requirements and current DAQ practices, and provides clarity and consistency for Title V facilities conducting non-major R&D activities. So this will continue to allow facilities subject to Title V permit requirements flexibility to work with the DEQ to authorize these activities in a streamlined manner. So a summary of this rule, paragraph A defines R&D activities and gives a definition that they're to conduct R&D into new processes and products supervised by trained personnel and not engage in the manufacture of products for sale or exchange for commercial profit. Paragraph B, emissions thresholds are outlined under which R&D activities can qualify as an insignificant activity because of size or production rate. So these activities must meet the R&D definition and the 3 emissions requirements. Additionally, pursuant to feedback received from the EPA, gatekeeping language was added as subparagraph B4 to ensure these activities remain non-major. Paragraph C outlines the permit application and reporting requirements for the owner or operator of a major facility with insignificant R&D activities. And consistent with existing rule 02Q0507, insignificant activities because of size or production rate must still be included in the facility's Title V permit application. For an existing facility that wishes to conduct R&D activities not already on their permit, the facility must provide notification to the division at least 7 days prior to commencing the activity. In all cases, records demonstrating compliance with the rule need to be kept and provided to the division upon request. For impacts on facilities, there will be little change, if any at all, from adoption of this rule, since these activities can already be authorized as insignificant pursuant to 02Q05038. And based on readily available data, the DAQ estimates about 5 to 10% of the 307 total Title V facilities in the state have insignificant R&D activities authorized on their permit. And that number represents the number of active Title V facilities in the state as of February 26, 2024, when the query was conducted. And of this research selection within the total 307 Title V permits, it was found that some didn't report their emissions from their R&D activities in recent years, indicating that their R&D activities may be intermittent and not conducted every year. And that means that any potential impact would be very limited given the low number of facilities with these activities. And for the regulatory impact analysis, there was no expected health or environmental impacts and no appreciable cost or benefit. So there will be no expected change as a result of this rule. And facilities will continue to have the flexibility to work with the DAQ. And the RIA was approved by the Office of State Budget and Management on March 1st of 2024. And an update on the hearing report. The hearing was on August 20th. The hearing officer was Commissioner Lyerly. The comment period was July 1st, August 30th. And there was only one commenter, EPA Region 4. And that EPA comment was a no comment letter acknowledging they had no comments on the proposed rule. And there were no attendees from the public and no comments were made up at the public hearing. And there were no changes to the proposed rule following the comment period. So here's where we're at, adoption by the EMC. And if approved, December would be the commission approval and tentatively effective on January 1st of 2025. So the recommendation is that the hearing officer recommends the proposed rule 15A NCAC 02Q0529 as presented in Chapter 2 of the hearing report, the approved regulatory impact analysis contained in Chapter 6 of the hearing report, and the hearing officer's report be adopted by the EMC. And with that, I can take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Say this, so required by General Assembly, no comments, no costs. I have not talking to Kim, but when I did talk to Kim by email, he didn't mention he had any problem with this. So if somebody will give me a motion to approve, we will approve this and keep it moving. Commissioner Weiss, motion to approve? So moved. Do I have a second? Mr. Tweedy with the second again. Very good, sir. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, request approval for the final determination of periodic review of the rules O2S. And Jessica, you'll do that, right? Very good.
Good morning, Chair Solomon and members of the Commission. Jessica Monte with the Division of Waste Management. I'm here to present the final determinations and report for the periodic review of existing rules for 15A and CAC O2S. These rules are the dry cleaning solvent cleanup fund rules, the administration of that fund. This is for 150B 21.3A that requires the rule review. We brought this report, which is included as attachment A, before this commission in July of 2024, where you all approved it to go to public notice. This is the report that designates the rules as being necessary or unnecessary, so we're not considering the rules themselves or the rule language. It's just the report that designates them as one or the other. We held the comment period from July 12th to September 20th, and during that comment period, we received just one public comment. That public comment is shown here. It was received from the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League. That comment letter is also included in as attachment B on the agenda. It basically just asked that, they saw that we had requested that 2 of the rules be designated as unnecessary, which meant that they would be immediately removed from the code by the rules codifier as soon as this report became effective. Their comment asked that those 2 rules not be designated as unnecessary. They wanted them to be changed to be designated as necessary, and that we include those 2 rules in our rule readoption process, which will start after this part of the rule review process ends. So in response, we are going to provide the response in the report that goes to the Rules Review Commissions, thanking them for their comment and saying that we have revised, as they requested, the determinations for those 2 rules from unnecessary to unnecessary, and that we will include these rules in consideration when we come back with the rule readoption of the entire subchapter. So in summary, the initial determinations that we had put out for public comment were 14 of those rules in that subchapter O2S were necessary and 2 were unnecessary, Rule 03, 02, and 05, 07. And then now our final determinations that we are proposing in the report and attachment A is that all 16 rules in the subchapter are designated as necessary and will be considered during the readoption process. So this is just showing that after comment, we fill in those last 2 highlighted outline comments or columns in red, the one column saying where we received public comments and the other column saying what our final determinations are from the EMC, all of which are now necessary. This is the review schedule. So we're here today to approve the final determinations, which will be sent to the Rules Review Commission to meet the deadline that they had set for this subchapter, which is to consider that report at their meeting in February of 2025. And then after that, they'll be submitting it to the Administrative Procedures Oversight Committee of the General Assembly. And they have 60 days to review it. So the final determinations will become effective either after it's reviewed by that committee or 61 days after they receive those final determinations if they don't meet. And then after the report becomes effective, we will work with the RRC to establish a readoption schedule for all of the rules. So our request is to requesting approval of the final determinations and our response to the comments for the periodic review of rules report for 15A and CAC O2S, which is the dry cleaning solvent cleanup fund rules. Any questions?
So a couple quick things. It's normal policy, and at least the last time we did the rules review, it was required. So it's a pretty low bar on what's necessary and unnecessary. So if you have a comment or say something is necessary, typically you push that on through. So there's nothing unusual that we had one comment and it became necessary. Ms. Monty, I'll ask you guys, as I always do, to keep these comments from this phase moving forward in whatever spreadsheets you're using so that we can reflect on those
Absolutely.
as the rulemaking starts as well, so that we can capture good or bad, whatever was said in this phase. Any other comments or questions of staff? Commissioner Baumgartner.
Jessica, I know we talked about it in committee because I seem to remember the question. Why was it unnecessary to begin with? Why was the division called us to unnecessary to begin with?
We were saying that the requirements in those rules, I believe one of them was unnecessary because it was requiring that we share information, but the FOIA already allows us to share information. Another part of the rule said that we had to notify other potentially responsible parties, but that's also, the submittal of the request to join this program, which is voluntary, is public record also, so they could find out that way. The other rule, I think it was 507, was regarding requiring a remedial action plan. But we, after, years of running the program, they determined that that is a plan that is not necessary. What is written into that plan is either in other plans that they have, or the plan is that they just put land use restrictions on a site that exceeds risk-based levels, so there's no need to have a plan, it's an unnecessary additional plan we were having them do, so they were all unnecessary for those reasons. And we still may bring those rules as proposed as repeals when we come back
Strike
to do readoption. We'll see once we've had further discussions with the stakeholders.
Correct. Correct. Okay. Seeing no other comments or questions, do we have a motion? I guess you're the ranking member, vice chair of the committee. So Commissioner Baumgartner, do we have a motion?
I guess so. Can you move back up to the other slide?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. I make a motion to move forward with DWM's request for approval of final determination response to comments for the periodic review rules report for 15A NCAC O2S.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Bailey.
I second.
Good. I wasn't looking at Commissioner Tweedy again. So. Just kidding. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. As we are, I think Ms. Shelton will do this brief presentation for us if she's here. She may not be here. Yes, there she is. So let me set the tempo for this for members that weren't in the Groundwater and Waste Management Committee meeting yesterday. This is the first time we've been acting on an IMAC under the new criteria that after 12 months, the commission must make a decision about whether to keep the rule and move it into permanent rulemaking or the IMAC goes away. Okay. So give you a little history. Commissioner Bailey chaired that. I was on her subcommittee. I think we started with 60 some to 50 some to 30 some a few years ago, where we had IMACs that were queued up for 15, 20 years, it seemed like. And we went through and put a bunch of those 30 some into rule. This was part of a cleanup process to say, we're not going to let them lay around anymore for 10, 15 years. We're going to go ahead and move them through. For new commissioners, the big determination here is regulatory impact analysis are not done on IMACs. The division director does them. And so as they get spread across the state, they are applicable statewide if people need them. They can get prolonged without any kind of formal rule action by this committee. So it gets down to general applicability. If they're going to be generally applicable, we need to move them into rules, or we need to do away with them. So this is the first time, and I'll preface everything that Ms. Shelton's going to say, is that we don't have a process. So what we're up against, we got 4 of these now that were used for one site. She'll explain all that. And the question is, do we want to vote these up or down in January as going into permanent rulemaking? I think in the future, what we need to do is when we approve an IMAC is to already get it on a schedule almost to say how many sites are going to be using this, what are the ramifications of this. It may get down to, should we even do an IMAC for one site, right? If somebody's got, like Martin Marietta, Commissioner Bailey's old employer, has 6 or 7 sites and we need something done, that's a great candidate for an IMAC. But for a one-off site, there's other potential ways to deal with that other than make a statewide rule out of it. So Ms. Shelton, I guess we're here for content, but we're also here for process as we talk to commission. So please go forward.
Yeah, great, thank you. Bridget Shelton, Groundwater Standards Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. So here today providing an informational item. This is the title that we presented yesterday at the committee, but we were discussing the director's recommendation to initiate rulemaking to establish groundwater quality standards for 4 compounds, bentazone, boscalid, fluorometron, and metolachlor in place of the established IMACs. So first, to quickly cover what an IMAC is and how they're established. So the Groundwater Quality Standards Rule 15A NCAC 02L 0202 with the reference listed at the bottom left here states that if there is no groundwater standard for a substance, that substance is not permitted in concentrations above the practical quantitation limit, or the PQL. So as a reminder, the PQL is the lowest concentration of a substance that can be reliably achieved by an analytical technique in a lab. It can also be referred to as the reporting limit. So to modify this requirement, any person may request the director of DWR to establish an IMAC or an interim maximum allowable concentration. If there is an existing IMAC in place, any person may also request the director update or remove the IMAC. So once a request has been received, the director has 180 calendar days to take action. So this is either to establish, update, or remove that IMAC. The O2L rule includes guidelines for the establishment of an IMAC. So when the person submits a request for an IMAC, they must also submit any relevant toxicological or epidemiological data, study results and calculations necessary to establish an IMAC in accordance with the procedures in the rule. This is to ensure that there is appropriate data available for the substance. DWR then evaluates the request to determine whether the information submitted is in accordance with the rule, and then reviews the information and calculates the health-based protective level for the substance. So these IMACs are health-based. They are calculated and established the same as groundwater standards using the procedures in the O2L 0202 rule. Once the information submitted is reviewed and the health-based value for the IMAC is calculated, the DWR director then may establish, update, or remove the IMAC if they find that the action will not degrade the quality of groundwaters, will not likely cause or contribute to pollution of waters of the state, and will be protective of public health. Public notice and opportunity for comment is provided at least 30 days prior to the final action, which is either the establishment, update, or removal of an IMAC. And then once that final action is taken on an IMAC, the EMC is also provided notice within 30 days. So once an IMAC is in place, what happens next? This is the new process as discussed. So within 12 months of the establishment of an IMAC, in accordance with the rule, the director makes a recommendation to the EMC whether a new groundwater standard in place of the IMAC should be established or whether the IMAC should expire. Once that recommendation is presented, the EMC then makes that decision on whether to initiate rulemaking. So if the EMC decides to initiate rulemaking, then the IMAC will remain in place until the groundwater standard is adopted, which takes place through rulemaking, or the IMAC will remain in place until the EMC declines to adopt a new standard. So that option here means that if the rulemaking process has begun and during that rulemaking process, for example, after the public comment period, the EMC decides to not adopt a new standard in place of the IMAC, then that IMAC would expire. Also, after the director's recommendation is presented, if the EMC declines to initiate rulemaking, then the IMAC expires. And just want to point out here that if an IMAC expires for a substance, then the PQL would then be used as the limit for that substance in groundwater, as discussed earlier. So this process here is why we presented to the committee yesterday. So we received an IMAC request in August 2023 to establish IMACs for these 4 substances. We received the request from ELM Site Solutions for an inactive hazardous site project at a formerly operated BASF agricultural test farm. DWR reviewed the request and calculated the health-based protective level for each substance. There was a public notice and an opportunity for comment provided in November 2023. We received no comments, and the 4 IMACs were established by the DWR director on January 18th, 2024. Here's some information on those established IMACs. So 3 of these substances are herbicides and 1 is a fungicide. We have the values for the IMACs shown here. More information on the data used to calculate these values is available online with the link on the slide here. The IMACs are all based on the non-cancer threshold concentration, and they were calculated in accordance with the rule using the EPA references listed here. So to present the director's recommendation for the EMC, the DWR director recommends that the EMC establish groundwater quality standards for bentazone, boscalid, flowmetron, and metolachlor in place of the IMACs during the next groundwater standards triennial review, which is expected to begin rulemaking in early 2025.
So this is an information item for us today with the intent that they're going to bring this back probably to committee first at the next meeting and then to the full EMC. Now, I say probably because the way we typically do this is that request goes to committee as it did yesterday. But this rule specifically says the way this works now is that it is the EMC's decision, not the committee's decision, that is final. So regardless of what the committee does, the committee may have heard it yesterday. we've got to make a decision in January of whether we go to formal rulemaking. So this is all information for you. This is background. And what I would like to make sure you guys have, if you've got requests of staff, the information you want to see when it comes back. I know yesterday, one of the things I asked for is, isn't there something in between an IMAC and PQL for a single contaminated site? Isn't there a negotiation that could go on between the department and the applicant so that we don't make a statewide rule for one situation and there another course of remedy for that applicant of a contaminated site? And I think the risk-based program was mentioned. I know Brownfields is probably a level parallel and different to that, but I'd like to hear some of those options as we make these evaluations. Commissioner Gibson, is there another?
Yeah, I'd also like to know if you have any information on the prevalence of these compounds in groundwaters across the state. Have they been detected elsewhere? If so,
Okay.
where, how many sites?
Very good. Commissioner Bailey.
Thank you. Also, I wanted to point out that what is sometimes problematic with the IMAX and how they're developed by the Division of Water Resources versus who's implementing it, which is the Division of Waste Management with their cleanup sites, that some of the information we're requesting is really going to be directed towards Director Scott's division. And that goes to, I am very curious about this particular project that's undergoing the cleanup process. And so one thing I noted is once they get the IMAC, they use that as part of defining the plume. And how far along is this project with defining the plume? Because sometimes it might take more than 12 months to do so. And I'm just interested in, if this doesn't go through, have they actually defined the plume? Where are they? If will it require extra work for them to continue to define the plume? Just in general, where are they with this process?
Okay, some
And
specific
cleaning up.
information about this particular applicant or this petitioner that is using the IMAC, the single person. Okay.
Yeah, and just to continue on, since it's new, I want to see how it impacts this individual, site and how it's going to work in the future, because we're trying to figure out how this is working for future sites too. So let's use this as a case study
Yes.
to understand the process.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Scott, do you have a question on that?
I just had a brief comment. Michael Scott, Director of Division of Waste Management. Our branch head's here with us, Janet McDonald, that can further speak to this, but that immediate question is an important one. But groundwater has been assessed at the site, so they're moving into working on a remedial action plan. So as you were talking yesterday, Commissioner Bailey, about plume delineation, the IMAC's going to set the plume at one delineation point. If they revert to PQL, then that plume size, could essentially change. And so, they are moving through the process and moving towards a remedial action plan based on the assessment data they have. So we'll follow up on that in January also, but I just wanted to interject that point.
And my question would be related to the risk management plan and other vehicles. Some of these property owners don't want land restrictions on their land. Again, are we doing this just for an applicant that could go into a risk management program and have land restrictions, but are we doing a statewide rule because one person doesn't want land restrictions on their 2-acre piece of property? I think
Right.
Commissioner Bailey and my comment on that is germane to how extensive that should be. Commissioner Gibson.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, I'm a little bit confused on one point. So if the IMACs aren't converted to a formal rule, that means the plume boundary would then extend to the PQLs.
Correct.
I see.
They've assessed to what the bar is. Moving the goalpost is the term we always hear. The
Right.
goalpost is the IMAC.
Right.
So they're assessing to the IMAC. If that IMAC goes to PQL, and Bridget and I have the figures from yesterday, we're in the thousands of micrograms per liter. The PQL is like 20 for some of these herbicides, right? 4-digit to 2-digit. So then that goalpost goes from here to a much bigger assessment. That was where I think Commissioner Bailey was taking the questions yesterday, trying to understand the impact of what would need to be done. So.
Yeah, and for Commissioner Gibson, the trail you run into is, as we mentioned, anybody can ask, once this IMAX established, anybody can tap into it. So the longer it stays open, the more people use it, the harder it is to get off the books. Nobody wants to get rid of the IMAC, but yet we've not gone through a regulatory rule adoption process to really evaluate it. So there is something to say, well, maybe we may just make the period longer. Well, the longer it goes, the more complicated it gets. So I think this is a great case study, as Commissioner Bailey says, to try to rapidly look at this and see what process we should be using going forward with converting IMAX to permanent rules. Commissioner Smith.
Just to follow up, I think these are all great questions to ask. I think one thing we need to be sure we're distinguishing is how IMAX are used in permitting situations versus remediation situations. And so in remediation, we have state laws and rules of this commission that address risk-based remediation. And that drives the ultimate cleanup level. That's really a slightly different issue than what the IMAC is.
Yes.
So the fact that the IMAC is in place doesn't mean they're going to clean up to the IMAC levels necessarily.
Correct.
That's addressed in the remediation plan and the remediation statutes. So we have two different uses for the IMAC, and it makes a difference which use we're looking at. And the only other thing I'll say is when the rulemaking was done in, I guess, early 2022 to amend the IMAC rule, the commission's IMAC rule, to create this need to either make it a permanent rule or have the IMAC expire. I think, my understanding, I came in late in that process, and I think the concern at the time was that IMACs were always intended to be site-specific standards, but they were being used not unreasonably when there's widespread presence of some of these contaminants. The IMAC that was being requested by a person for a site was being used more broadly, and the need to incorporate that into rulemaking. So that's how we ended up where we are with the either make it a rule or have it expire. Maybe we need a more nuanced
I would think we
option
do. I
in
agree.
our rule in terms of the process.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing we need to do is keep in mind that remediation's not necessarily driven, the ultimate remediation goal isn't necessarily driven by the IMAC.
Correct. And could I ask this, Director Scott, if y'all could bring back too, I remember in this process, you guys approved the IMAC, or actually Director Rogers does. DWR is in the rule, not Waste Management, which is interesting too, by the way, because standards are over there, but you're the remediation guy, kind of speak. But I think there's like 4 or 5 programs that use this, to Commissioner Smith's thing. So it's being used by different programs along the way, even though the IMAC is really for this one applicant for this level. So I would like to know how many of your sub-programs, if you will, are actually using an IMAC, because they may be using it different ways. Is that crazy talk, or is that correct?
Yeah, let me, maybe if I could just make sure I understand. So this IMAC, we're pretty sure is specific to this site in Holly Springs for 3 herbicides and 1 fungicide. IMACs are used by various waste management and DWR programs, I think was your point.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Understand Commissioner Smith's comment, they're applicable, but people are using them for different purposes. And I just want to make sure we understand all the purposes as we look at the process and how we sort through that. Commissioner Bailey?
Thank you. So I've said this before, I'll say this again, but I think the IMAC provision should be removed from the water quality, from the groundwater standards 2L. I think it should be its own rule because it impacts so many other programs and it's used differently. And it's not a standard, so why is it in 2L? I just think we need to, now that this is happening, we have this 12-month timeline on it. It's going to have to be used differently. And it seems worthwhile to me to take it out and revise it and think about it as we look ahead in the next couple of years probably. But I just think it's inappropriate in 2L. It's not a standard. It's more of a program.
Okay, Commissioner Ellison.
Could you go back 1 slide, please? Okay, go back another slide. There we go. So, Mr. Scott, you said the concentrations from this site were in the thousands.
I don't think he said.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood.
Yeah, I was referencing the PQL. So part of the committee discussion yesterday was the established IMAX, health-based values
Right.
compared to laboratory quantitation.
Okay.
And so we followed up on that last night, got those PQL levels. So if you're asking about the specifics of the groundwater levels at this site, I'll have to see if I can pull the data or ask our supervisor to speak to that point, if that's your question.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what they have versus what you're allowing versus what the PQL would be.
Right.
So relative difference.
Yeah.
Director Scott, do you and Ms. Shelton have everything you guys need? My intent here was to spend 10 or 15 minutes of information so this commission would be informed so that we can make some quicker decisions as a full commission in January. So I think we've got that. Do you guys have everything you need at this point?
Yep.
I think so, yeah. So we'll go back to committee in January.
That is my intent, and then we'll have to do a 30-day waiver to get this back before the full EMC, but we'll talk, council and I will talk about that in more detail. Okay? And if you have any questions in the meantime, talk to me or the committee chair. Yes.
Just clarity as the ranking groundwater member. Committee is doing a recommendation to the EMC, and the EMC will discuss and then make motion whether to move forward. Is that procedure?
Yes, yes. I think because that's normal rulemaking, right? Although an IMAC is not necessarily a rule, this has to do with proceeding to rulemaking, so there's a little bit of a gray area there. Does the rulemaking standard even abide conservatively? It does, so that's what we'll do. But
But the committee's not,
council may
voting-
advise me differently.
the committee is not voting up or down. It's just making a recommendation to the EMC, and then EMC will discuss.
Yes, nor can the committee, which is a concern, delay for 2 more meetings because this has a punch list deadline on it. So we need the committee to hold up the full EMC. Okay? All right. All right. Thank you, guys. Any other comments or questions? Got it? Okay. Let me go to director's comments as we come through the information items. Toby, 5 bullets, 5 thoughts, 5 minutes. Give me the high spots.
I'll keep you less than that, sir. Toby Benson, Director, Visionary Land Resources. Up there. Thank you, sir. Like I said, I'll do you better than I'll try to keep it to 2. Primary comments from Division of Energy and Land Resources. We've worked with our consultant in development of an updated statewide probable maximum precipitation study, which has been under development since earlier this year to add to the latest. And we've also are attempting to add to the latest 2 storms from this year, one on the coast and, of course, Hurricane Helene, for improvement of that tool. This should not impact our planned publishing date in April of 2025. Note, this tool will replace the 40-plus-year-old information that is currently used for dam and infrastructure design for worst-case storms in North Carolina. Some of you may be familiar with HMR 51, 53. Denver will be publishing the study and making it available over our website for public access. We're also holding sneak peek presentations to Denver staff and also today to flood blueprint representatives over the next couple of weeks to show how the PMP tool will work with ArcGIS. This is currently a preliminary test tool that we're also sharing with designers for dam hydrology and hydraulics evaluation and design for current dams that are under review at this time. We're still developing the temporal distribution portion of the tool with our consultant, which should be completed by March of 2025, prior to our publishing, of course. In other news for dam safety, our Asheville and Winston-Salem regional offices have inspected over 300 dams in their regions following Hurricane Helene. We also mobilized 12 additional staff from our Eastern regional offices to assist in this work and in this important endeavor. Several have moderate to severe damage, with only 3 being what we would consider partial failures due to significant damage to those dams. Several are still under further evaluation as we move through that, and we've documented 2 dam failures of non-jurisdictional dams in the Asheville region. Staff will continue to inspect and evaluate the remaining dams in the areas impacted and respond to inquiries and requests for inspection. This will end up taking quite a bit of additional time as we've got hundreds of other dams in the region to take a look at. Also, just a final note, to announce, many of you are familiar with Dr. Kenneth Taylor, our state geologist. He will be retiring at the end of this month And so we are planning a celebration for Kenneth here in the ground floor hearing room on the 19th, starting at 11 a.m. So you're all invited to join if you're able.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Scott. And again, I appreciate all you directors having these comments online ahead of time because I know it takes effort, but it helps us read them ahead of time and it gives you the ability to be flexible in what you say today. So Director Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Solomon, members of the commission. Just a few follow-up items. Appreciate Secretary Kelly's overview of the Hurricane Helene response. As she noted, we've been active on the debris management front. We have over 100 temporary disaster debris sites activated in Western North Carolina. Important fact there, 70 of those are brand new sites, meaning they were not established, pre-event or preparing for upcoming storms, which we really advocate for. We've had to really find new sites and get them quickly through the process. I'd like to thank Jason Watkins and Drew Hammonds, Jessica Monty, who you heard from today. She worked through the weekends along with Chris Hollinger to get these sites approved. In regards to FEMA reimbursement to local governments, these sites do require DEQ pre-approval so that federal money can reimburse the disaster management and debris management process. So we are trying to make sure that we're not solving one problem, meaning debris, and negatively impacting a site environmentally or state historic resources. So it's important coordination effort on that front. We've also deployed multiple assessment teams, as Secretary Kelly mentioned, under Emergency Support Function 10, which is oil and hazardous substances. We've had unfortunate releases of petroleum. We've had above ground tanks that have literally floated down the river. There have been propane tanks scattered throughout Western North Carolina, acetylene torch tanks, anything that can float, move with flood waters. We've been working collaboratively with EPA to get those identified, and then ultimately EPA contractors are deployed to collect that material and safely dispose of it. And actually staff are on the French Broad River via boat this week, actually identifying other items that we could not locate via shore and getting that material out so that future rain, as Secretary Kelly mentioned, does not have further impact. So a lot of ongoing work on that front. Just want to acknowledge the work by staff and how much effort they put in on this front. We will continue to do so. A lot of debris to manage, as Secretary Kelly mentioned, the 10 million cubic yards is a catastrophic event. We're looking at all options to make sure that landfill space is preserved in Western North Carolina. We already send some waste out of state as North Carolina, so we imagine that some of this debris material will also leave the state, but we are working with our recycling partners where we can compost these wood chips or send them for boiler fuel or find outlets that are not in our lined landfills to manage this material so that we don't have a further impact to landfill disposal capacity. We have worked on interim guidance when it comes to the management of impacted soils and sediment. It's been a popular question. We've been in touch with Farm Bureau, a lot of questions about managing landslide material. How do you safely manage the soil and sediment for this type of event? So we've been disseminating guidance on that front and working with stakeholders. We touched on it yesterday in committee, but we are actively working on a new bridge loan program for our UST program to help those in the impacted region of Western North Carolina, to offer them loan assistance so that they can get UST systems properly assessed and back functioning so that infrastructure can get back into place. So just wanted to provide some of those additional updates. Another important area for us, we are actively compiling the sanitary landfill data for PFAS that we've mentioned to this commission before. A sanitary landfill is one that accepts municipal solid waste like the white garbage bag from your kitchen, construction and demolition waste, which is self-explanatory, and our industrial landfills that take everything from paper and pulp material to coal ash. All of them were required by DEQ to sample for PFAS. We've got that data set for the most part summarized. We have also identified an initial subset of facilities where the PFAS data shows in groundwater and potentially off-site, meaning surface water detections of PFAS, that there's some next steps for this subset of facilities that they need to take. Those next steps primarily are a receptor survey looking around the landfill since PFAS has been detected to make sure especially private well owners are not impacted, and also working with their consultants to further assess these man-made compounds that have been identified. So the department does plan to send out this initial subset of landfill letters in the next week or so, describing the data that the facilities collected, our review of the data, and some next steps. We are partnering with facilities. DEQ's already done a lot of sampling around landfills and tried to help landfills that are discovering this data, meaning PFAS. Yes.
Just to interject, it is a common question I get asked now. I think the consultants know it's out there and some of the property owners know it. So as soon as you can release that data to the EMC, I would love to see that data set and have that. It's starting to look like you guys maybe keep it in private for some reason. So I think as soon as you can get it to us, that would be great, and to the public.
Yeah, we will definitely do that. And a lot of these files, we've got the direct laboratory files. We're going to start loading our online document system. So we will get the commission, an updated summary of the data, but we're also going to load that to DEQ's public repository, which is Laserfish. So that information is public information, and we'll make sure both of those fronts are addressed. But the main message is we have identified a subset of landfills that have PFAS, and there are some next steps based on the review of that data. And we've discussed this with the industry. They're aware of as well. And an example of that is the largest landfill in North Carolina, the Sampson County landfill, operated by GFL. They do have significant levels of PFAS in groundwater. I would also say their leachate, and also in surface water next to the facility. So they're an example of a facility who's needing to take a next step. They are being proactive in that they're already designing a remediation system to address PFAS that they've discovered in different media, surface water, leachate, groundwater as examples. We're also working with them to review those next steps, and especially some groundwater aspects from the facility that ultimately go out to a constructed wetland next to Bearskin Swamp. This particular landfill I'm highlighting because it's also captured the interest of an environmental group who ultimately has filed a lawsuit against the facility. My understanding is they're trying to negotiate a settlement of that lawsuit, but the lawsuit specifically addresses PFAS. And in the lawsuit, the detections of these man-made compounds or PFAS outside the perimeter of the landfill is one of the primary areas. So we are working collaboratively with the facility on next steps to stop these compounds from leaving the site and associated remediation that's going to be needed. So we'll keep the commission updated on that.
And if you guys want a briefing on that, there's a couple of different aspects to this. It's one of those things I talked about. We've got our main line of things to think about. This is one of those that could come swooping into us. That leachate is going to a different river basin, to a different plant that's being discharged to surface water. So that's something that we probably need to know about. I don't think it concerns us in the short term, but it could cross our path at some point. Like, how did PFAS get to that river basin? So, I mean, that may be something we need to just be briefed on at some point, but I'll let the commission brief me on that, and we can talk to Director Scott if you guys need to hear more about that landfill.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And last item, appreciate all the colleagues who have worked on the utility scale solar decommissioning program. We've been trying to keep the commission apprised of that. These are rules that are making it through DEQ rather than you as the body of the EMC. But we did have a public hearing on November 7th regarding those draft rules for utility scale solar decommissioning, which was required by Session Law 2023-58. And we're looking forward to getting those rules finalized in the near term for utility scale solar decommissioning. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Hold questions to the end. Any other questions in the short term? I think that was a good report. Director Rogers, you have a question? Commissioner Ellison?
When will the solar rules, what's your guesstimate of when those will be finalized for the decommissioning?
Since we just finished the hearing, we're thinking February-ish. So first quarter, 2025.
And do those come before the commission at all?
They do not.
Okay.
For the session law, they're DEQ rules.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we've been trying to keep the commission apprised of this process, and been a lot of great stakeholder input, but yeah, they will not come before the commission. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Director Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I too want to thank Secretary Kelly for her great overview of hurricane relief. The Division of Water Quality, as she's mentioned, been working in a lot of different areas. I do want to thank some special employees that really put time in. Julie Gribb, Michael Pagetro, who are deputy directors, were working pretty much 24/7 the first 2 or 3 weeks of this event. Our regional office supervisors, Eric Hudson with Public Water Supply, as well as John Hennessy, have also taken on a large task of coordinating the operations in the regional offices. It impacted Asheville mostly, but all of our regional offices participated in making calls to public water supply systems and wastewater treatment systems in the early days, just trying to connect. There was a long time where we couldn't even connect, just trying to find status on that as well. So much appreciation in our Asheville regional office, which has been impacted desperately. Our regional office supervisor out there was working away from home, trying to get his family situated in Tennessee for a while, but still kept up the work and did a fantastic job, and they continue to do great work in the field as well. Regarding our public water supply systems, there were over 800 out there, and today the system status, there's about 6 that have unique system statuses that aren't fully operational. They are operating, but perhaps not fully. There's an ongoing interconnection with one. We have 5 systems that have some distribution system pressure problems. And then also one that is waiting to get cleared with some bacteria testing. Boil water advisories are still out there. There's about 15 of those total that are on boil water. We mentioned Asheville a little bit. They are a large system. They are still on boil water, but they are making gallant efforts in trying to get that corrected. And I believe their turbidity problem is being managed pretty well now. We're just waiting for the system to get flushed out, and hopefully they'll be back in order in the near future. Related to our wastewater treatment facilities, there's 253 wastewater treatment facilities that are in the impacted areas. Secretary Kelly mentioned the impact. These things are in low-lying areas. We're at Old Fort. Old Fort received 14 feet of water in their wastewater treatment plant. Amazing story. The operator was out there the day we visited. They had more than 2 feet of silt on the property, trying to remove that. And they had just gotten power back, and they were trying to get things moving. So incredible work by individuals, and resiliency is amazing amongst the people that have been impacted. Currently, we have 4 that are partially operating and 5 that are closed due to significant damage. An example of that is Chimney Rock, I think, where they are gone. And we're taking action there to get mobile plants in there or other alternative action, working with Lake Lure on that as well. Updating a couple other things regarding permitting. We have ongoing conversations. Our trout farm permit, we will be meeting next week. I think we're getting in the short rows there. Hopefully, we're going to look and finalize a draft permit that we'll be comfortable sending to EPA and looking for their approval in that area. We have several public hearings coming up, and we certainly appreciate all the commissioners who are participating in those. In my comments, they are listed with dates, and 3 of those hearings are the groundwater PFAS hearing. We also have the Vanceboro Quarry hearing next week as well. The O2T rules will be going out on December 5th. And then we have a Lear Corporation NPDES permit on December 17th. So we appreciate y'all's support there and working with us. Our wastewater treatment permit, general permit work group continues to meet. We're beginning to make some strides again. We'll be meeting next week to continue our discussions there. A couple weeks ago, the department had their distinguished employees awards that were handed out. We are kind of like a proud dad But our public water supply section PFAS sampling team that scoured the state, taking PFAS samples at water systems across the state, won the team award for the department. So we're extremely proud. I would name them, but there's about 30 of them that were on the team, so I won't go through them individually. But we're extremely proud, and the work they did has been very informative in helping us and helping the systems themselves as we move in and move the process forward with treatment of PFAS at those systems. Calculated about a $250,000 savings to these systems from having to do the samplings themselves. Individual folks that were nominated from the division were Catherine Jemison. She's a chemist out in our lab in Asheville, who pretty much maintains and runs our recreational lab. It does a lot of E. coli sampling for the lab for swimming and those kinds of things. Nora Deemer, you've seen her before. She's with our planning group. She was nominated as well. And Tresha Price from Public Water Supply from our Raleigh Regional Office was nominated. So we're real proud of them. In addition, Michael Mellinger and Eric Smith were also recognized for team awards as well. Staffing, I would like to report, our staffing levels are the best they've been since I've been here. We currently have about 50 vacancies. When I came to work a little less than 3 years ago, we were at 128. So we're making progress there. It has helped. We've filled some supervisor positions, which gives us some stability. And now we're trying to work on some key engineering and also environmental specialist positions. The secretary implemented an employee blitz. So we are blitzing away, trying to get those positions filled. We appreciate that as well. And lastly, I reported last time that we were doing great from a drought perspective. We had a very dry October, and currently the state is kind of in an abnormally dry state. So I was talking with Commissioner Yarborough earlier, and he says we're always just 10 days away from a drought, I think is what he said, and I think that is true. That's the extent of my comments, Commissioner.
Very good. Thank you. Questions for Director Rogers? Anybody? No? Okay. Director Abrazinskis, you're on deck. Or you're at the plate, I guess.
The cleanup hitter. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I too want to thank Secretary Kelly for her remarks earlier, and my remarks will build upon hers and complement my fellow directors on the Hurricane Helene response activities, where our team in the Division of Air Quality is spending time supporting federal, state, and local partners, their contractors, and individuals with technical assistance related to managing disaster debris. A lot of that work in DAQ is being led by our Deputy Director, Taylor Hartsfield, so I want to thank her for all of that hard work. As part of that effort, we're providing technical assistance to local governments that want to use air curtain incinerators for management of vegetative debris, yard waste, and clean lumber. We're helping them navigate some of the federal regulations that apply to those ACIs. And we asked EPA for some relief for certain aspects of provisions of those federal rules. EPA responded to our request, and they provided some information and clarifications on November 6th, including a notification from the EPA administrator that he had signed technical correction notice on November 4th that addressed one of our concerns. And so we're very appreciative of EPA's response to help us manage some of these efforts in Western North Carolina. Secretary Kelly mentioned there's just a tremendous amount of disaster debris to manage in Western North Carolina. Burning's going to be part of the portfolio of managing some of that disaster debris, such as vegetative debris, yard waste, and clean lumber. And in those cases, the use of air curtain incinerators are most certainly being encouraged by DAQ to be used as opposed to open burning. The Secretary noted the environmental and safety benefits of that approach. Beyond those activities, we're also using our compliance and enforcement discretion for facilities that were impacted by the storm, specifically if there were compliance reports or permit renewals that were due in that period of time in that federal declared disaster area. We're working with those facilities to give them additional time to prepare those needed documents. We've reached out to all of the facilities that are subject to Clean Air Act Section 112R, the Chemical Accident Prevention Program. Those are the facilities with threshold quantities of hazardous substances. And we did that in all the counties designated as a federal disaster area to make sure they were okay, make sure that there were no issues, making sure they didn't need any technical assistance. And I'm happy to report there were no major issues identified or reported there. On the air quality monitoring front, we took actions before the storm to shut down some of our high elevation monitoring sites. I'm glad we did because those sites experienced 70 to 100 mile an hour wind gusts. I'm happy to report we had no losses in terms of equipment at those sites, and everything from our permanent monitoring network is back up and running as it should be. That is great news. Complementary to those activities and to proactively address some of the concerns about the impacts, about the significant amount of increased burning of certain debris through the fall and winter season in Western North Carolina, which coincides with the time of the year that we have temperature inversions that tend to lock air pollution in place in some of our mountain valleys. We are deploying non-regulatory monitors for fine particles in strategic locations where we don't have monitoring sites currently. Those include our Asheville Regional Office near Swannanoa, Fairview, Lenoir, Boone, and Hendersonville. Additionally, through EPA Region 4's Sensor Loan Program, we have borrowed and are deploying 11 air quality sensors. These are fine particle sensors that'll give us indicator data, and we're deploying those in Rutherford, Forest City, Morganton, Marion, Blowing Rock, and several more in Buncombe County. Again, that additional indicator data will help us inform the public of any potential issues that may occur over the fall and winter season. It'll also help our air quality forecasters where there's really no data to help them forecast air quality on a daily basis. I'll conclude with just a quick staffing update. We're about at the same we were at the last meeting, 26 vacancies in the Division of Air Quality. We've welcomed several new employees since the last meeting. We've also had a few employees leave for better pay. We've had 3 employees that are, we have 3 employees that are retiring at the end of the year. So I want to publicly thank them for their public service, and that's Tony Sabetti, Terry Davis, and Ed Martin. We wish them well in their retirement. I'll finish with some sad news. A DAQ employee, Brian Bland, passed away last week after a long battle with cancer. He worked for the division for 28 years, most recently as an engineer in our permitting section. So a celebration of life will occur in the coming weeks for Brian. That's all today, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Director Abrazinskis? Anybody? Okay, thank you, Mike. Secretary Kelly, I'll let you follow that before we go around the horseshoe here.
I think the only thing to add is that our Asheville Regional Office will be reopening this Monday, April 18th. So they still don't have potable water, but they will be coming back into the office as they are able. So there is some additional leave for people who still have extenuating circumstances at home, but the office will come back online.
Very good. Thank you. We used to have a long list of legal issues, and we don't always do a briefing on this, but I've asked council to give us just a quick briefing today since it is the last meeting of the calendar year. And we can come back with more details in January, but just some of the things, I don't think we have many direct, but we have a few indirect that we maybe want to be aware of. So, council.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair Solomon. Just a couple of bigger cases that may come across the commission's radar. The first one is North Carolina Farm Bureau versus Department of Environmental Quality. In that case, the Farm Bureau challenged 3 conditions contained in general permits for animal waste management systems at certain swine, cattle, and liquid waste poultry farms. The case has been through the Office of Administrative Hearings and the Wake County Superior Court. There is currently a decision from the Court of Appeals holding that the 3 conditions at issue were actually rules and should have gone through the rulemaking process before being included in and enforceable via the general permit. That case has been appealed, and the North Carolina Supreme Court just granted discretionary review on October 18th. So I will keep you all updated on when that case is finally decided by the Supreme Court. The other case you all have heard a bit about already, which is the City of Asheboro versus the Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Water Resources. In September of 2023, the City of Asheboro filed a petition in the Office of Administrative Hearings challenging the 1,4-dioxane conditions in its NPDES permit. About a year later, the administrative law judge issued a final decision granting summary judgment to the city of Asheboro. The court had a variety of holdings in that, but the gist of it was that DEQ erred in setting effluent limits for 1,4-dioxane in the NPDES permit. I will note that within that ALJ decision, the judge specifically noted that nothing in the decision prevents the EMC from establishing water quality standards through rulemaking. There's a line in the decision that allows, or that specifically notes that. The Attorney General's office filed a petition for judicial review and motion to stay in the Wake County Superior Court on October 11th. So we are going to have further litigation on that case as well, and I will certainly keep you all up to date on that decision. A couple other fallout items as a result of that decision, which have also been touched on at this meeting, but as was noted yesterday, DEQ was required to notify the EPA of the Asheboro decision out of the Office of Administrative Hearings, since it did change the conditions in the Asheboro permit. On October 31st, EPA provided a letter of general objection to the changes in the Asheboro permit as a result of the Asheboro decision. EPA now has until January 6th to supply specific objections to DEQ. Within 90 days of EPA providing those specific objections, the state or any interested party can request to hold a public hearing. If there is no public hearing and DEQ does not submit a proposed permit that satisfies the EPA's objections, EPA will take over that NPDES permit for the city of Asheboro. The other tangential item related to that decision is you all are aware of SELC's petition to the EPA to de-delegate North Carolina's NPDES program. SELC filed an amended petition with the EPA, including that Asheboro decision. It also noted the EMC's pause in developing water quality standards for PFAS. I checked this morning and I have not seen any response from the EPA, so we are just waiting on any, if we will get a response from the EPA on SELC's de-delegation petition. The final issue that I wanted to touch on is I know you all received what purported to be a rulemaking petition for 1,4-dioxane. That petition was sent on November 7th. The petition was not actually complete under the statute, so it has been returned to CFPUA, and we will look for a completed application if they decide to do so, or petition, excuse me, in the coming weeks, just so that you all are aware. Once we do receive a completed petition, the commission has 120 days from the date of the petition to decide whether to grant or deny the petition. And that determination does have to be made by the full commission. So that will be coming across the commission's radar as well.
Okay. Good news is nothing directly against the EMC right now, but plenty of things on the side to watch that could cross in front of us. Commissioner Smith, question for council?
Yes, one quick question. My microphone falls apart. Regarding the Asheboro, permit, is it correct to say that they are continuing to operate under the permit they had prior to reissuance of the permit with the additional conditions? So we're going back 2 steps essentially in terms of what they're operating under currently.
Right. So the Asheboro decision, the judge purported to strike out the conditions related to 1,4-dioxane in that permit. Otherwise, that permit is still in place.
So there's nothing, just that 1,4-dioxane, everything else was applicable, my reading of it.
That's my understanding.
So the status quo now is that they are operating under what is then essentially a renewed permit, but minus those conditions, or are they actually operating under the permit that preceded that permit?
I don't know.
Okay.
And staff may can get that for us if you want.
Thanks.
Staff, Richard and staff, let's not do it now. Let's just, my purpose here was just to make sure we don't do these every time, but we we need to keep the commission informed of all the tangential things that are going on that could come across us. And certainly these are all one. And right now, there's nothing direct against us. So that's good. All right. Any other questions for council? Okay, let's go around the horn. I think I started with you last time, Commissioner Yarborough. So we'll start with Commissioner Bailey this time. Any committee chairs you can report out briefly, but any comments? I think we've heard most of the committee stuff anyway, but Commissioner Bailey, any comments for the good of the group?
Yes, I have some comments.
Very good.
Thank you. As everybody probably on the council knows, I live in the Cape Fear River Basin. And we received many letters from people in that area about the PFAS water quality standards. So I just want to know, I want those people to know, I recognize that they've spent a lot of time sending the comments to us. We did talk about how some of them were a listserv, but some of them are also written by individual people that have lived there for many years. And while I'm not on the Water Quality Committee, I certainly care about our water in that area. And I feel like the staff is making progress with identifying the issue and ways to handle it. And the Water Quality Committee is coming up with ways to creatively address those issues. So I hope that we continue to work towards, I don't know that we can take all the PFAS out of the water, but work on programs to make it better for the citizens in the Cape Fear River Basin. And we've recognized him already in this meeting, but I did want to thank Director Ken Waldrop from the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority for attending our meeting and showing his interest in what work we're doing, especially as it impacts his community. So thank you for being here. That's all I have to say. Oh, and thank the staff. I mean, all the different things that are going on with PFAS. I mean, it's affecting all the different divisions. And so everybody's working really hard to define it. And also thank you for your efforts with Hurricane Helene. So I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank
Commissioner
you.
Gardner.
Yes, sir. Just a quick readout on the Groundwater Waste Management Committee yesterday. Thanks for all who were in attendance. We had 2 action items, one of which was the periodic review for 2L, 2N, O2O, and 2O2P. And that past committee will be coming to the full commission for requests to go out for public notice very soon. You all heard the other action item earlier from Bridget concerning the 4 compounds, pesticide compounds, and related to the IMAX. So no need to jump that rabbit again. On a personal level, thanks to the department for the long time coming of getting us new emails and set up on an O365 account. Long time coming, but we're glad that it's finally set up. And Richard, continue working on that laserfish issue as well, if you would.
Thank you, Commissioner Bumgarner. Commissioner Deering.
I'll just say that my thoughts are with the people of Western North Carolina, including the department staff during the upcoming holiday seasons.
Commissioner Ellison, any comments?
I'll try to be quick. Director Rogers left one out. I got a little bit involved in some of the aftermath of Helene, and I got a report from a potential chemical spill down near Marshall, and I called, tried to get a hold of Assistant Secretary Mazemore, and she was out and about, and the very nice lady who had answered the phone gave me another number, and I called it up, and I hear this answering from the emergency center, and it's a mellifluous and familiar voice. And I said, to whom am I speaking? And she said, my name is Karen. I said, is it Karen Higgins? And she said, well, yes, it is. And I think the point is it's all hands. It takes all hands. All hands are required and all hands are appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. King.
Thank you. Be quick due to time. We had a really good meeting yesterday, water quality. Just really appreciative, the committee was, of Secretary Kelly being a part of that. And we had 1 action item, in fact, and it was nice that we all saw how all that worked and had you by our side. And You know, just enjoyed that. I was sort of nervous yesterday, but believe that or not, but I was. But I enjoyed having you. Thank you so much. But yesterday, we did have one action item. I request approval to proceed to EMC for public notice and hearing on proposed triennial review amendments that we've been talking about for some time. So that's coming to you next. It was unanimous, and we voted on that and to move forward. So you'll see it in January. Then we moved on to the PFAS. That was in September. The committee asked that the department come back and with some ideas of the PFAS and moving forward with source reduction and sort of a rules design maybe, and a lot of questions yesterday, robust, and the meeting was nearly 2 hours just in that. So we enjoyed that back and forth questions and answers with the department. We had a few questions to come up. Who will be required to monitor it? Who will be required to evaluate source reduction options and submit minimization plans? What PFAS levels trigger a minimization plan? And what reduction targets ensures success? That was a good discussion on that. And then what is the implementation timeline? So with that, the committee unanimously gave a nod to ask or direct the water quality director and the division, the staff, to develop a PFAS minimization initiative for major and minor industrial discharges to surface water and all significant industrial users, SIUs, that discharge to publicly owned treatment works, POTWs. The minimization initiative will require monitoring for PFAS and implementation of minimization activities required to eliminate and significantly reduce discharges for PFAS, PFOA, and GenX levels to be determined. And I want to reiterate that levels to be determined came out of yesterday's meeting that we've certainly used Michigan as a model, maybe a baseline. We've asked the department to look into that if they have a real success story there. They're using numbers, and it was brought out yesterday that if they had to do it again today, would those numbers be different? But the department is looking at specific numbers. They would like to sort of look around and use that. But I think it was clear that this Water Quality Committee yesterday is going to focus on current updated science. And that data will be used to bring forth a plan, an initiative to do exactly what we're going to do is required to eliminate and significantly reduce discharges of PFAS, PFOA, and GenX. With that said, they will come back in January, not with an action item. But this is a process. And we're leaving the dock on this, and we're going to get into some fog, but we're not going to run aground, and we're going to do it slowly. And it's going to be in January. They've sort of got their ideas put together. We understand it's Thanksgiving. We understand it's Christmas. We understand it's New Year's. We understand that period of time where staff and those take off for their holidays. So we're being patient, and we're going to look through this issue, but very importantly, we're going to move forward on it. And this will be over a 3 to 5 year period. That's what was brought up as well. How to grab all of these chemicals and what to do with them. And is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be a year? Is it going to take 2, 3, 5 years? You know, what is it? But I think the consensus yesterday was that the committee supports now the department to move forward and let's get as active as we can and get all back on science and get the data that we need. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner King.
That is the first, and the second one was 1.4. And I'm not going there because we decided yesterday that we would let that 1.4 piece play out because of directives and litigation and all that council. So we didn't even go there yesterday. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Gibson.
Thank you.
Comments, any comments? Commissioner Gibson, any comments?
Sure. I just wanted to thank the DEQ staff for all of their work in the recovery from Hurricane Helene. And again, let me know how NC State Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering can help over the longer term.
Very good. Commissioner Smith.
A couple of things, both related to the issues of emerging contaminants we've all been dealing with, both PFAS and 1,4-dioxane. I appreciate the discussion in the Water Quality Committee and the turn toward thinking about source reduction. That seems to be a productive line of discussion. But I will say, as the committee continues to work on that and works toward bringing something back to the full commission, to make a source reduction program actually effective, we're going to need some form of reduction goal and a mechanism for enforcing it. And the Michigan program that was discussed in committee yesterday, I believe at Chair Solomon's request, Michigan actually adopted water quality standards for PFOA and PFOS and used their NPDES permitting process, the existing process, to put that program in place. And while there are other ways potentially to have a goal and have an implementing mechanism, I think something needs to be in place in both categories to make a program for source reduction really effective. The second thing is sort of a bigger picture concern about emerging contaminants generally. We know the state rulemaking process by design takes a long period of time. We're now in the third year, I believe, of discussing 1,4-dioxane and at least the second year of discussing potential yeah, exactly.
year on
I
PFAS.
undercounted
PFAS.
significantly. There have been many years of discussion of 1,4-dioxane. And of course, we've now got a couple or 3 years of discussion of PFAS. In my opinion, it is not the intent of either the Clean Water Act or state water quality laws to allow sources of toxic pollutants to discharge those toxic pollutants to waters classified for public water supply with no limitation. And we are coming very close to a situation of exactly that because of the controversy over the narrative standard, which has been the backstop. The narrative standard was the basis for the progress that we made with respect to the Chemours plant and the enforcement action concerning Chemours. It was the basis for the progress we've made on 1,4-dioxane with respect to the Greensboro situation. But there is clearly a lot of controversy around the narrative standard, both within the commission and outside the commission. And I think going forward, it may be worth, and particularly if, for any reason, use of the narrative standard is no longer possible, I think we may need to look at a surface water equivalent of what we do on groundwater, which is to say we have a zero discharge limit for a toxic contaminant going into a public water supply source in the absence of a specific numerical standard. We default to a detection limit, something along those same lines. And we probably would need to provide a similar short-term ability to request an interim standard if we went in that direction. But the default cannot be unregulated discharge of toxic pollutants to public water supplies.
Agreed.
That's the end of my sermonette, but I appreciate the
No.
discussion yesterday.
And I think we do have a narrative report that was due to the General Assembly, and I think we've got some thoughts together on that. And along the lines of your thinking, I think there will be time in early next year, we need to put some things on paper to keep the ball moving forward. I appreciate those comments. Commissioner Tweedy, any comments from you?
Just briefly, by the time it gets around to this side of the table, usually everything's been said. So I just want to say I enjoyed Secretary Kelly's participation in the meetings this week. And you have a tremendous staff in your charge that you should be proud of. So we certainly couldn't do our important work here without them. So thank you.
Thank
to
you.
all.
Commissioner Weiss.
The water
allocation committee did meet yesterday. They'll be coming before the entire commission in January for a periodic review of the 2G rules. Those are the Jordan Lake allocation rules. And I believe that Commissioner Tweedy spoke for me on this conclusion. Thank you.
Mr. Yarborough.
Grateful for the secretary. This has been great. I've been here a year now, and for you to be here means a lot to us because we can be able to do it. Thanks for all the staff. I've keep learning, and it's getting to be these acronyms. You know, after yesterday, I realized that IMAX is not a Scottish rock band now, so I guess. But I used to play music on a couple times a week, and I always tried to pray to God to give me the strength and help me learn and be able to do a good job. And my little daughter came up to me, Dad, why do you always pray before you play? And I said, well, so God will help me do a good job. And then she looked at me funny and said, well, why didn't he listen? So that's, I guess the story of that is I'm trying to listen and learn, and thank you for being patient with me and Ellie with my computer yesterday. So thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank all of you for the time that y'all have given, and it's been a productive year. I thank Ellie for jumping in here, coming off from maternity leave and being, boy, you got baptized by fire, but thank you for that. I want to thank Secretary Kelly, especially. You've come in. It's great to have you here yesterday. It's great to have you here today. I appreciate the close conversations you and I have, and so I thank you that. Three things leave everybody with, I think, and I'll try to be brief, but we do have our state emails now, as Commissioner Bumgarner mentioned. I'm not sure what the capabilities on Microsoft 365 are, but we look like we have those too. So just a reminder, if you're downloading documents, you can download it to that OneDrive and have all those in a publicly available space, which would probably be better than making your own notes on your own computer. If you could do it, we'll talk about that more later, but I think that's very encouraging. We have the email and maybe have access to drop any of our markup documents or downloads onto the state drive as well. I think that'd be great. Second thing is, this is the time of year where we do the annual ERC report. So that means we kind of summarize what we've done for the year. And in the past 2 years, it's been similar to what Commissioner Smith said. It's kind of been similar. We've had emerging compounds. We've had the 1,4-dioxane. We've had the PFAS. We've had wetlands. We've had nutrients. A couple years ago, we had the advanced clean trucks, and we had Reggie things coming through. That wasn't really here with us this year. But I think we dropped in some other things in there like rules readoption. So you'll hear me talk more in January, but again, I think this year has been productive, and next year we're going to have the same kind of things. We're going to have emerging compounds. We're going to have nutrients especially. We're going to have IBTs in a major way, and we're going to have rules readoption. So those are four big things that are going to take really five when you put the two emerging compounds in. So we got a lot of things to do. Secretary Kelly and I agreed on this, and something I've advocated. We need to keep making progress. And I think we have made progress. We don't need perfection to get in the way of progress, as it says. And for some people, they'll say it's too incremental. We need to hit the home run. Others will say it's too fast. But I think as long as we're making good progress and pushing the ball down the court, and you guys have. So I really appreciate this EMC and all the work you've put in this year. And we'll be back in January, and we'll talk more about the upcoming year and kind of get rechartered moving forward. I will say this, we have to have patience in January, kind of like patience here, but we'll come back and we will have a new governor. We have a new secretary, and we're going to have a new House Speaker. We're going to have a new EPA director. And so there's a lot of cards on the table that'll be changing. It cannot be a distraction. We have to keep doing the good work we're doing at the pace that we're doing it at, and just focus on the job at hand. So I thank all of y'all. And if no other questions or comments, we're dismissed. Remission will begin 10 minutes, I think. I think the official rule is 15, but probably at 12:30, we have one remission hearing. And a couple directors, I think Commissioner Yarborough and I may have just a few questions for a couple of y'all specifically on the Western North Carolina thing. So thank y'all.
you.